Hi, today we're interviewing Dr Mark Griffiths at Nottingham-Trent University. Just to start us off, Mark, I was hoping you could briefly summarise the kinds of research you do.
Okay, I've spent the last 27 years studying gambling. My main area has looked at problem gambling, not that I'm anti-gambling in the slightest. Obviously, I think the gaming industry and we as researchers should be concerned about those where gambling affects their lives, their finances, everything that people do. I think what's amazing in this country is that people often perceive me as being public enemy. People often perceive me as being public enemy number one because I research problem gambling. Yet my friends who research problem drinking, no one ever accuses them of being anti-drinking. There is a culture in this country that if you in any way attack the industry for the products that they put out there and people get into problems, they take it personally. But of course, I think we should be working together. Surely, in terms of a long-term business model, problem gamblers are not good in terms of making profits because they've got such a short shelf life. I also think that the kind of business models gambling operators should be doing is, instead of using the kind of 90-10 rule where 10% of the customers generate 90% of the 90% of the profits, they should be going for, if you look at Camelot for instance, they've got the vast majority of the population spending small amounts of money and making huge profits, and I would like to see that to convert to the slot machine industry and the casino sector, the bingo sector, because I think that would be better for all of us.
Wonderful. Well, we've touched on quite a few core points of the interview, so let's try and elucidate those one by one. First off, I'd like to start with some questions about the perceptions of gambling in the British media. So, over the past year, the mainstream media has been pretty vocal in its criticism of the gambling industry. The Guardian went with a headline, "Roulette machines, the crack cocaine of gambling," whilst the Daily Mail reported a terrifying parable of the addictive power of internet gambling. What do you make of this criticism, and do you feel it's in any way justified?
I think when you talk about the media, is that the media's job, is to report news, but they like to report bad news. It's amazing how whenever I do a piece of research, if it's a good news story, maybe 10% of the papers will pick it up. If it's a bad news story, 90% of the papers will pick it up. Basically, misery and bad things sell newspapers. So I don't think it's actually that they're anti-gambling, it's just that they're anti-everything if it does something wrong within society. And of course there are some papers like the Daily Mail who, the editor has got a particular thing about gambling and is very anti-gambling. So it doesn't surprise me that the Mail consistently come up with negative stories. But to be honest, it's very hard to have a positive gambling story. I mean, the positive gambling stories are usually reflecting big lottery winners, something that usually the companies want to put into the papers. But it doesn't surprise me that addiction is what sells newspapers, and if it's a gambling addiction, then they hope that readers will want to actually read those kinds of things.
And following from that, if it's the case that it's substantially harder to put out a positive gambling story versus a negative story, does that in any way suggest that negative coverage is justified? Does it suggest that there are fewer positive stories to tell about gambling?
Well, the bottom line is that all research consistently shows that a small minority of gamblers do get into trouble with the activity they're engaged in. By the consequence of that means that the vast majority of people who gamble don't have any problems at all, but that doesn't sell newspapers. Sure. A story that says most people enjoy gambling is not going to make news, whereas 1% of the population addicted to gambling. I mean, I don't believe that there is 1% addicted to gambling. And one of the problems we've got is that when we do studies, we actually rarely mention the word addiction. We'll talk about things like pathological or problem gambling, and the press then equates that as equaling addiction. So, for instance, what's called the British Gambling Prevalence Survey, which we do every few years, the latest survey said that 0.9% of Britons have a gambling problem. Press interpreted that as nearly 1% are addicted. Now the thing is that all gambling addicts are problem gamblers, but not all problem gamblers are addicts. Problem gambling can be, problem gambling could just mean that you spend far too much of your disposable income on gambling, but it may not actually be indicative of addiction. And that is one of the problems we've got, is that the press will use and interchange words to suit their story. And I do think we have to kind of contextualise this. I've spent over a quarter of a century researching gambling problems, and yes, we know that a small but significant minority have problems. The number of people who are genuinely addicted in the same way that people are addicted to alcohol or heroin and other things is actually very, very small. Because there are very key criteria to what addiction actually is. But of course, if somebody turns around and says, I'm a problem gambler, and that problem might be that it's causing relationship problems or it's causing financial problems, that would be defined within the British Gambling Prevalence Survey probably as a problem. But you'd be amazed that the number of problem gamblers who are genuinely addicted to gambling, at least how I define it, is actually very, very small.
Okay, well, we're going to touch again on the issue of addiction. No, it's fantastic that we have this kind of summary. Do you think the media is categorically anti-gambling, or is it merely critical of the gambling industry in its current form? So is there any capacity for the media to be positive about gambling if it were to change?
Okay, I don't think the national British press are anti-gambling per se. But as I say, at the end of the day, they are running a business and they have to sell newspapers or they have to get subscriptions online. And as I say, I think if you're pointing out really bad things that happen, more people are likely to read that. We as human beings, we always like to compare ourselves to other people. In psychology terms, we call this social comparison theory. It's a bit like keeping up with the Joneses. When you read about the misery of somebody else, it makes you feel better. And in fact, most newspaper stories are about death and destruction and misery and addiction. These are the kind of things that editors believe people want to read because it makes people feel better about themselves. So I don't think that the British press, on the whole, is anti-gambling, but that's not to say there aren't some editors out there that have an anti-gambling stance. I think most people would agree, if you look at the Daily Mail coverage over the last 6 or 7 years, it has been really anti-gambling, and it really tries to make a mountain out of a molehill. Now, I'll give you an example. In 2006, I ended up on the front page of the Daily Mail, and the headline was "Gambling with a Generation," and the first line was basically said, British psychologist says millions of children will become addicted to gambling. Right now, this was just total poppycock. The journalist was a guy called Tim Shipman, who now works at the Washington Post. I said to myself, I'm not going to be interviewed by Tim. So for instance, one of my findings, which was in a study that we did, we found that 4% of all juvenile crime in one particular city was related to slot machine playing. That was then reported as 1 in 4 youngsters had committed crimes because of gambling. To take 4% and make it 1 in 4, it's just shocking journalism. Now, as I say, Paul Dacre, the editor of the Daily Mail, has consistently been kind of anti-gambling, and I'm sure that's why a lot of anti-gambling stories get into the Daily Mail. Now, that doesn't stop me being interviewed by them, because I like to get my point across. But again, if you look at all the stories I personally have been involved with the Daily Mail over the last year, nearly all of them have involved things like gambling via Facebook, and it's all about trying to point out that millions of women or children are going to have problems with this activity. And of course I've never said that at all, but of course one quote can be taken out of context to actually sell that particular story.
Okay, well, we promised to steer away from any apocalyptic
headlines. No, it's fine.
Okay, why do you think gambling is so heavily demonised when other arguably more destructive vices like alcohol and junk food escape the same level of scrutiny by the media?
Well, I actually disagree with that. I don't just research in gambling addictions. I research in most behavioural addictions, including things like video game addiction, exercise addiction, sex addiction. My work touches on things like obesity. I was part of the government's working group on sedentary behaviour. Mm-hmm. In terms of what comes out in the papers, I can tell you now, obesity is one of those things that's just as lambasted as gambling. Really? So I don't believe that gambling is demonised anymore. Obviously, I think most people accept that alcohol, when taken to excess, is problematic. Most people know that alcohol is a potentially addictive drug. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it. I drink alcohol. I love drinking alcohol. I think most people who partake actually like that particular activity. But I know that a small proportion of the population get into trouble with it. Gambling is another one of those consumptive behaviours that, like alcohol, it's kind of socially condoned, socially accepted, but when taken to excess, can lead to problems. But I think most people's conception of alcoholism and heroin addiction versus things like gambling addiction is that, I think alcohol and heroin might be seen as more medically legitimate than gambling. And I think there are some people out there who would probably say that gambling is that person's own fault, it's due to weak will or whatever, and they don't think it's a genuine problem. But I would argue is that just like alcohol, gambling is one of those activities. Yes, there are individual risk factors, but the way that, for instance, gambling is marketed or advertised, the way that games are actually designed and developed, does mean that vulnerable and susceptible individuals can get into problems.
Okay. Why do you think the media is apparently unwilling to regard gambling in moderation as a legitimate form of entertainment? Why isn't it willing to take that stance?
Well, I would disagree that it isn't willing to take that stance. I think, there are loads and loads of gambling stories, as I say, but most of them tend to be more negative because I believe that's what they think will sell papers or what people want to read. Sorry, I don't know where I was going there. What was the question again?
Why do you feel that the media is apparently unwilling to regard gambling in moderation as a legitimate form of entertainment?
Okay. I suppose gambling in moderation, it's one of those activities that because it costs money for people to do, there are a lot of people, particularly in a time of recession when suppose there's not a lot of money about, is that spending your, if you like, your finite leisure pound on gambling rather than something that's more productive, or at least what the papers see as more productive, would lead to people viewing that negatively. Now, of course, in the recession, people, there are two views about what happens to gambling in a recession. Some people argue that because it's a recession, there's not a lot of money around, so people try and maximise their kind of financial outlay by actually gambling and trying to win more money because they can't get it through the job. For other people, because they haven't got much money, gambling is an activity that will just drop out of their kind of leisure repertoire because they can't afford to do it. And my guess is both of those things kind of, cancel each other out. However, if you look at, for instance, the number of new bookmakers that have sprung up in the last kind of couple of years, does suggest that gambling is one of those things. It may not be recession proof, but it does seem to be one of the few businesses that doesn't seem to be negatively affected by the recession.
Having said that, that might very well be true in the UK, but we've done a separate study where we've looked at the travel figures to Las Vegas, and they've taken an absolute nosedive since the global recession in 2008. So it does seem to indicate that casino tourism, if you like, isn't recession-proof in the way that.
But there's a difference between being, the example of Las Vegas, and I went to Las Vegas in June. I took the whole of my family to Caesar's Hotel, Caesar's Palace, and we stayed there. The thing about that, of course, that cost me £4,000 just to get there before I'm even gambling. If there was a kind of Las Vegas type casino on somebody's back doorstep, I think even in a recession, people would actually flock to go to there. The fact that the number of trips to Las Vegas is down is just the pure prohibitive cost of actually getting to Las Vegas in the first place, and is not to do with gambling in and of itself.
Okay, and last question about media coverage.
Okay.
What do you make of media outlets, such as The Sun, that condemn gambling in its coverage, but sanction it as a business opportunity by running a bingo platform? Isn't this just blatant hypocrisy?
Okay, well, it's just totally hypocritical.
Yeah.
Any newspaper that is anti-gambling and then actually profits from people gambling either through their website or through some kind of their product, it's just I can't think of another word other than hypocrisy.
Yeah, well, that was the word we felt as well, so I'm glad you agree there. So now we're going to ask a few questions about gambling in popular culture, particularly in Britain. What do you feel is unique about gambling culture in the United Kingdom?
Well, to be honest, I'm very lucky that I travel around the world and I see lots of different gambling cultures, and I wouldn't actually say Britain is unique in any way.
Really?
I think the perception from abroad is that Britain has always been a nation of gamblers. Now,
really?
Yeah, and the most interesting and most profound change that I've noticed since I came to this area was when the National Lottery was introduced in 1994. We suddenly had an activity that 2/3 of the British public were gambling on, even though most people, if you say to them, do you gamble, they'll say no, and say, do you play the lottery, they'll say yes. So, and it's quite obvious there is a kind of mismatch between people viewing playing the lottery as a form of gambling. But what the lottery did, it made gambling more socially acceptable, it made it more socially condoned, and what you got was this kind of drip, drip, drip effect. So the lottery came in, and of course immediately the football pools and the bingo were basically saying, you've taken some of our customer away, you're not letting us advertise on television, we've got to have an equal playing field. So the government, in terms of liberalisation and deregulation, allowed bingo and football pools to advertise in print media, radio, TV. And then of course you've got the other parts of the industry saying, hang on a minute, why are scratch cards being advertised in the middle of Coronation Street? You, the Home Office, have just said that hard forms of gambling are those which have high or rapid staking. Well, scratch cards can have high or rapid staking. You're already allowing that to be advertised, every half an hour on ITV every night. So why can't we advertise our products? And of course, this led then to the Gambling Act, and there was many, many years of people like myself being interviewed about various aspects of things. But of course, what's happened in a very short period, in kind of 15 to 20 years, is that gambling now, I think, is a highly socially acceptable activity. is that, of course, now with online opportunities, the fact that people can gamble remotely from their mobile phones, from interactive television, through the internet, it's absolutely everywhere. It's actually endemic within British culture now. We were one of the first countries that actually legalised internet gambling. So we're actually saying that we are a kind of progressive, proactive nation. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. This idea of America trying to ban internet gambling was just absolutely ludicrous. Britain has actually taken a very progressive stance, a proactive stance. It's tried to literally grab the nettles and try and sort this problem out. So it's quite clear that we are, a gambling nation, because our successive governments have basically said people do want to gamble, we'll give them opportunities to gamble, but you as operators now have to put in place kind of harm minimisation measures, player protection measures, responsible gambling features, so that the harm can be kept to a minimum. So I think my perception is I don't think we're unique. And I'm very lucky because I do travel from country to country seeing gambling cultures. I think what we do have in this country is that we're a lot more kind of relaxed and tolerant of other people gambling, even if we don't gamble ourselves. There's a big anti-gambling kind of significant minority faction out there, and they're often a lot of faith groups, people that have been affected by gambling themselves. And you'll get that with alcohol, you'll get that with other kinds of illicit drugs. Gambling is no different. But I think, honestly, in 20 years, our kind of, the nation's kind of heartbeat on gambling has really softened, and that most people now, if you include the lottery, most people, gamble rather than not gamble.
Okay. I suppose this is somewhat related to the previous question. How do you think the public perceives different forms of gambling? Is our perception of bingo and poker different, say, to our perception of roulette and slots? People have different feelings towards different games, different practices.
We know for a fact that people think differently about different games, and of course there are some people who, for instance, play the lottery and would never dream of engaging in any other gambling activity apart from maybe a once-a-year bet on the Grand National. There are some things that are perceived as kind of bringing people together. I think the buying lottery tickets, buying the odd scratch card, betting on the Derby or the Grand National, those kinds of things are almost like, in a way, we're almost expected to have a flutter on. The amount of parents that give their children, say, right, here's £1 to gamble on the Grand National, which horse do you want to choose?
Mine did.
And those kind of things are kind of socially acceptable, people do them. Now there's a big difference between that and, for instance, going into a casino and spending all night playing poker or blackjack or sitting there playing a slot machine. We know that the number of people who frequent casinos is very, very small. Less than 5% of the British public will have gone into a casino in the last year. It just shows you that's a very low prevalence activity, although of course casinos in and of themselves are generating lots and lots of profit, which suggests that a small amount of people are generating this profit, of which a proportion of that will obviously be problem gamblers as well. Now, in terms of how the public think about different activities, of course I do think this is where the media can have a role sometimes. So for instance, we've seen a lot of stories over the last year about fixed odds betting terminals in betting shops. They have been painted out by the media to be the most addictive things ever, and it will probably put some people ever wanting to play those things in the first place because of the amount that it could cost them and how much money you can lose very, very quickly. Now the thing about this is that my attitude is, if you're a gambler and you want to gamble on something, you should have all the information up front to make an informed choice about whether you're going to play or not. Now, I'm sure, when I talk later about, how and why some people become addicted, there is quite clear an association between problem gambling and fixed odds betting terminals. But we have to, we have to take the point that it's not the game itself, it's how those games are designed. And I'll come to that later on in the interview, because I know we're going to cover that.
Thank you very much. In your research, what have you learned about different gambling demographics? Are people of a certain age or gender inclined to gamble on certain games?
I think when we look at anything to do with the demographics of gambling, is that what we know is it differs culture by culture. Here in the UK, what we tend to find is that the only activity that's played more by women than men is bingo. There are two activities, lotteries and scratch cards, that are played equally by men and women. Every single other activity tends to be played more by men than women. However, having said that, I think those kind of differences between the games are going to kind of diminish over the years. It will become a bit like alcohol. 40 years ago, most men drunk. It was most men who were alcoholics. Now what we see is that just as many women drink as men, The only difference is the types of drinks that people tend to get addicted to, and I think this is what will happen in gambling, is that I think what's happening now, there is a real push to bring, for instance, women to play online bingo. We know that women love playing bingo, so what the online firms have done, they've decided we don't want to alienate half of our potential customers, so why don't we bring them into a game we know they like playing offline, and bring it, an online dimension, allow them to chat to each other, make it a kind of social fun. But of course, in terms of online, is that the games tend to be a lot faster, the event frequency is higher. There is actually more potential for people to develop problems in those kind of online environments because of the event frequency. We also know that men kind of gravitate towards skill-based games and women tend to prefer chance-based games. But again, this is cultural. Now in this country, for instance, we are the only country in the world where men are more likely to play slot machines than women. You go to most other places and it pretty much is equal in terms of the number of males and females gambling, say in America, on a slot machine. The thing about our slot machines over here, of course, is that we are the only country in the world that actually have slot machines that don't use a random number generator, and that for people who know what they're doing, there is a small element of skill in playing a British slot machine. People can literally watch the machine fill up with other people's money, then come in and actually get the payout from it. We actually tracked down the patent in this country and found that British slot machines use what's called adaptive logic. They have what's called a compensator put in. Now the reason for this is that in this country, particularly kind of what we call single site machines, the machines that were at cafes, chip shops, movie foyers, etc. These single site machines were often what kept the business afloat. Now if you used a random number generator, kind of RNG techniques that are used abroad, they're on a kind of yearly payout cycle. The thing is, the shops, chip shops, cafes can't wait a year before they get profits back. They have to have a regular set of profits being paid back. So what happens, instead of the kind of cycles of probability being based on millions and millions of spins, here in this country they're on hundreds or thousands, which does mean if you watch a machine fill up with £300 of other people's money, that machine does have to pay out in the short term, and so-called sharking, backstabbing, skimming, whole load of names has built up where people come in and basically take those people's money. So for me that is a skillful element, even though essentially slot machines are still on the whole chance determined. If people understand British slot machines versus American slot machines, is you will realise there's an element of skill, which is why I think here in Britain young males like playing slot machines, because they see it as akin to a kind of video game. It's a skill-based game that if you know everything you can do better. But abroad these are totally chance determined, which is why both men and women will play them. So what we know is that culturally there are differences based on how particular products are designed, and we know that males and females tend to gravitate towards different types of activity, with men more skill-based, women more chance-based. But there's also an age factor as well. We know, for instance, that online gambling is very much the domain of those aged between 18 and 34. You get a much higher proportion of younger people gambling via the internet. And of course, these are people that have been brought up in this technological culture. I look at my 3 screen-agers. They have never known a world without the internet, without mobile phone, without own interactive television. My children, the gamblers of tomorrow, they will actually partake in gambling in areas and mediums in which they're familiar with. The typical 50-year-old is probably not, either doesn't trust or not very familiar with the online world. My mother, before she died, she still couldn't even program the video. She'd never even turn on a computer. Someone like her is not going to be able to gamble online. Yet, of course, all the people that, like my own kids, that were using state-of-the-art technology from 3 or 4 years old, you can imagine them being the gamblers of tomorrow and wanting to gamble in the things that they find most comfortable in and actually trust.
Absolutely. In your view, is there a disparity between the way the gambling industry represents female gamblers through advertising and the actual gambling habits of women? Does this come down to a degree of chauvinism inherent in gambling culture?
It's quite clear that traditionally females have not been big gamblers. Even when they do gamble, if they go along to bingo, it's more for the social elements rather than to win money. Of course, what bingo halls have done, they've kind of got linked jackpots now. They've made the jackpot prize much bigger. What that has done is brought younger females in to play who are actually more money motivated than being socially motivated. But interestingly, it's brought more men in. Again, by increasing jackpot size, if you go into a typical bingo hall now, you'll probably find around about a fifth of the people in there are actually males. 20 years ago, it was probably 99% females, and it was what was stereotypically called the blue rinse brigade. You go in now, and you see, you know, the spread of females is right down to kind of 18, right up to those in their mid-70s. And this is all because, if you like, the structural characteristics of the activity have changed. Whereas before you might win the equivalent of a can of beans, now you can win, you know, thousands and thousands of pounds through a linked jackpot playing right across the country. Now, obviously, if I was running a gambling operation, what I don't want to do is alienate half my potential customers. So, of course, what people are doing now is feminising their products. So, what are the bookmakers doing? Instead of, you know, having the, you know, a kind of bet on, you know, who's going to win a particular league, it will be who's going to be next evicted from the Big Brother house, who is going to win an Oscar this year, who is going to be evicted from I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. They're going to choose activities that they think females will have an opinion on, and might actually want to have a bet on as well. So it's not just the case of, you know, bringing in online bingo and actually catering for activities that females traditionally play anyway, is you've got to bring activities that you think females might actually have a view on and actually want to engage in. I think we'll see this right across the industry. Now, I can't, you know, one of the real blocks for, or one of the barriers for women at the moment is there are a lot of gambling environments are seen as very male biased and male based. If you walk into a, you know, typical casino, if you look at the people actually gambling, then probably 90% of them are men. There may be other women around watching, having a drink, watching their partner play or whatever, but people find those, you know, those environments very male dominated. And as a result of that, women actually gambling in what they perceive to be male environments, like a bookmaker's or like a casino, it's something that women may feel is stigmatises them, or they feel alienated from it. And of course, what some casinos are doing, and we've noticed it here in Nottingham, they have female night, you know, women nights only. Women can come in, they get a free meal if they come, and then they can play and gamble in the casino. So I do think most sectors within the industry are starting to realise there are, you know, 100% of people out there. Why are we only catering for 50% of them? And I think you'll find lots and lots of advertising, marketing, and just different ways of gambling to bring that female audience in.
Okay. And how has the increase in the number of celebrity endorsements of the gambling industry, take Shane Warne's affiliation with 888 Casino, Ray Winston's voiceovers for Bet365, does the fact that a known figure openly endorsing gambling, say on television, on the internet, through various media outlets, makes gambling seem more acceptable?
Well, certainly celebrity endorsement in any area of selling something is seen to be something that will bring the punters in or bring the buyers in some way. And to be honest, firms wouldn't spend hundreds of thousands of pounds paying people to do it if they didn't think it had an effect. Now, with gambling, it can work really well for you, and it can actually go really wrong. I mean, the most classic case where a celebrity was used, where it actually resulted in people having a downturn in gambling, was when Billy Connolly advertised the National Lottery. At the time, he was purple bearded. You know, he was somebody that was, you know, in a series of commercials wanting people to play lottery. Now, what Camelot found in their research was that, yeah, there was high recognisability and high recall for the advertising campaigns, but it actually put people off in wanting to gamble on their products. Now, obviously, people like Shane Warne and 888.com is that they're trying to portray a particular image. Here's somebody who is well known all around the world, international star. Okay, you know, it's basically saying if you come to 888, you're identifying with Shane Warne as an individual. You know, in effect, you're trying to say is I want to be something like Shane Warne, a successful man who's, you know, wealthy, got a beautiful girlfriend, etc., etc. Ray Winston, you know, he's, you know, if you look at him through in terms of the typical sports bettor, they've probably chosen Ray because he's got that kind of regional dialect, London accent. You know, he's basically Joe Public in terms of how he comes across, but it's been incredibly successful. You know, the in-play betting market is the fastest growing market in this country, and who are the most successful firm? It's Bet365. Even my 12-year-old son, right, when we're watching a sports match now, what does he do? He tries to guess what Ray Winston's bet is going to be during the half-time. He'll go, I bet he's going to say that Rooney is 2-1 to score the next goal. I mean, that has become so endemic that, you know, even my own, you know, teenage children recognise him, recognise what he's doing. So they're an important part. Now, for some people, there's always going to be celebrities that put them off, you know, gambling on a particular product. And also there are things when things go horribly wrong. You know, we had the example, for instance, of Churchill Insurance, and we had Vic Reeves, who was the voiceover, and then he was done for drink driving. And of course, being in the insurance firm with Churchill paying out on car accidents, they couldn't have him as the voice anymore. So there's always a thing in terms of reputation management. You know, there's an old cliche that reputation takes a lifetime to build up but a second to destroy, and that's what, you know, whenever you get any kind of celebrity endorsements, yeah, they could have a real kind of kind of halo effect for a while, but if something goes wrong, then that might actually hit on the product as well. And gambling is always going to have that kind of image problem. If my guess is, Shane Warne is not somebody that is controversy free. There are things around him in terms of, wild nights and spending too much, blah blah blah. Now that might actually be appealing to a small amount of audience, and maybe 888 have done their research and realised that he's going to attract the kind of customer that they want. But celebrity endorsements are here to stay. There's nothing that's going to stop them doing it. People do believe that it makes a massive difference in terms of uptake and acquisition of that activity, and it's not something I condemn. All I would say is that I'm not anti-gambling in the slightest, but I am anti-adolescent gambling. And I think where you've got celebrities, my son's a cricket fan, knows who Shane Warne is. We for many years now watched IPL cricket. Shane Warne was captain of the Rajasthan Royals, but him promoting gambling, if it's done during a time where children are actively watching, I think that has negative effects for children. But it shouldn't stop. As far as I'm concerned, gambling's an adult activity. It's got a right to be marketed in advertising, but it should be done and targeted at times where adults are watching rather than children.
Right, now we're going to move on to a pretty hot topic, especially in online gambling, and that's social play or social gambling. So for users, social gambling is services where you gain real cash using social media platforms. So popular games, poker, bingo, slots, so on and so forth. Social gambling is a relatively new phenomenon. How do you feel that it will develop? Do you think it will remain limited to relatively few services, or does social play represent the future of online gambling?
I think looking at social gambling, everybody's watching everybody else at the moment. I mean, when Bingo Frenzy was launched in August 2012, almost every sector was looking to see whether this particular game was going to take off on the Facebook platform. Now, I'd love to have a crystal ball and say what I think is going to happen in the future, but I think the issue is actually bigger than social gambling / social gaming. What is happening, of course, is that almost any area that you work in now, people are trying to monetize their products. So what we're seeing now is convergence between lots of different platforms. I was writing articles 10 years ago where I was predicting that gambling companies were going to start using video game technology, that video game companies were going to start bringing gambling elements into their game, and that is starting to happen. Now, the fact that Facebook is another platform that's kind of come to the fore in the last few years, of course, if you're an operator and you know that there are millions of people spending lots of time every day on a particular platform, anyone with any nous about them will think, we need to get our products in there. Now, in a way, what a lot of the companies do, particularly on kind of social gaming platforms, is they use foot in the door techniques. They get people used to playing particular types of games. So, for instance, something like Zynga's, Texas Hold'em Poker, one of the most popular games on Facebook, around about 35 million people playing it every single month. I know that's a worldwide figure, but that is a huge amount of people playing for points. Okay, they buy their virtual cash and then they play poker. Now, to me, this is a psychological masterstroke. The idea that you get people to pay for virtual currency to then play a game, and we know that millions of people do it. If I was saying the kind of next thing to add on is that, look, you've been buying all this virtual currency. We can give you an opportunity now to actually use your real currency, and you might not even have, by using virtual currency, that you have lost that money. There's no way of getting it back. But of course, bringing in real gambling is that people have the chance to win that back. Now, what's bizarre when you see things like PKR, who started having virtual accessories that people could buy. So while people were playing poker, you could buy credits to have people buy alcohol while they're around the table. I mean, this is happening in all forms of online gaming, social gaming. Is the virtual accessory market is worth millions and millions. This is a case where people will gladly pay money to dress their, if you like, their avatars up in particular types of clothing. This could easily be kind of transferred to kind of online poker rooms, for instance, where you create your avatar and you get people to start playing. But of course, the bringing the real money element in is something that every operator would want to do, because that's where the biggest profits will be. Now, saying where do I think things are going to be in 20 years' time is that 10 years ago I could not have things like Facebook. I would never have dreamed that something like a social networking site would have taken off in the way it has and revolutionised gaming. Has the potential to revolutionise gambling. It's just one of those things. Again, in terms of marketeering, it's a marketeer's dream, because here is a platform where we know lots of women predominate. We know that loads of women spend loads of time on Facebook chatting to their friends, playing Candy Crush or whatever. And what we've got is a situation that if we want to bring out a gambling product, we can use one of these foot in the door techniques to get people who are already gaming and playing for free and playing for points. We can also offer them, opportunities to gamble as well. Now, of course, what companies are starting to do is play the game for free but win real money. And again, this is a classic foot in the door technique, is getting people familiar with the game, getting people in a no risk situation where they can play for nothing and potentially win prizes. When they win prizes, they feel great. That reinforces them. I mean, the whole thing about human behaviour is we don't actually stop engaging in behaviour unless we're getting constantly rewarded for it. Now, every social game that I can think of, from Candy Crush through to Texas Hold'em poker, is a game that's full of reinforcement and rewards. Now, for most people, that will result in persistent play, and for a small minority, persistent play might lead to problems. So as a psychologist, I can see how psychological techniques can be exploited, and that and that a small proportion of people, if they're vulnerable and susceptible, can be sucked into that and develop problems. Now, that's a kind of moral question, whether you should be doing that or not. But we get that in all walks of life. Now, your basic question is, is social gambling going to take off? The answer is we just don't know yet. But my guess is you're going to see more and more convergence just between gaming and gambling anyway. There'll be lots more opportunities for people within gaming environments to have a little flutter, and there'll be lots more gaming, kind of video game environments that will start to introduce those gambling type elements. It's just the kind of cannibalization of all these fields. When I started researching back in 1986, 87, I was researching gambling addiction. Then early 90s I started doing video game addiction. Then 1994 internet addiction. Now, video gaming, gambling, internet, they've all combined. Everybody can do it on the same device. I remember in 1990 talking about something I called a teleputer that people carried around with them, that they could phone on, that they could do everything in terms of what a computer could do to watch television. And I said, maybe one of these will be available in 50 or 100 years' time. It's basically taken 20 years for this technology to be there. When people talk about internet gambling, even that now is just an obsolete term. We're talking about remote gambling that can be done on any tablet, any mobile, any device. Okay, it's not anyone that's got online capability. Now, obviously, if that's linked up to a social networking platform, and you can advertise to people on the move. The basic rule of thumb is that where you increase accessibility, not only do you increase the number of regular users of activity, but you increase the number of problems as well. So what we need, of course, is a kind of social responsibility infrastructure in place that can, help us with those vulnerable and susceptible individuals. But, I really wish I could give you a definitive answer on whether social gambling is going to be a big thing in 10 or 20 years. We just don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it is, but my guess is that the gambling and gaming field will have moved on by then anyway.
Okay, well, it's almost a shame we didn't take out the fluster on the invention of the telecomputer 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, media convergence is a process which is happening across all entertainment industries. Sort of predicted nicely in the 80s, and it's come to pass. I was interested, though, you were talking about the kind of natural, logical progression between these foot-in-the-door game services where you begin playing for free, you become familiar with the rules of play, transitioning seamlessly, or ideally seamlessly, to real money play, where you can actually be rewarded for your play. But, one of the biggest players in free-to-play online poker, Zynga, sort of had to retreat with their tail between their legs after attempting to obtain a real money gambling license, and now they're completely pulling back on plans to expand into real money play. So it seems like the market isn't yet as stable as it should be, which, as you say, it seems like it should be a match made in heaven, but it doesn't seem to be as straightforward as that. Do you have any idea why that might be the case?
Well, it'll be, come down to jurisdiction by jurisdiction in terms of what they're prepared to allow. Britain, as far as I know, we're the first country in the world that's legally allowed gambling companies to operate products through Facebook. Every other jurisdiction is looking to us in terms of, whether this is causing any legal problems, whether there's any psychosocial impact, and that's why we can't kind of second guess. The bottom line is that anyone operating in any sector, whether you're the mobile gaming sector, mobile gambling, internet, interactive television, it's all about monetizing the products you already have. Now, obviously, the freemium models that work with games like Candy Crush, for me, this was where gambling is going to go, because what you're going to do, you're going to give people, hours and hours of fun, playing for absolutely nothing, But of course, if people want those extra levels or those extra experience, they have to pay for them. And of course, what the gambling operator will start to do is, look, you're already paying for these extra levels for effectively a virtual asset, or something that's virtual. Why not we give you a chance to actually win the money back that you played with? And I can see companies, if they're allowed to do it, in being able to do that. But like you say, there'll be some jurisdictions that just decide, we're not going to allow that. This is the thin end of the wedge. We don't believe, they might take the view that social networking environments are basically predominated by adolescents, and therefore we don't want, if you like, adult activities on those. I think that's going to be very hard to do. I do foresee a time that in 20 years' time, if social networking as we know it now is still around, that gambling will be endemic. But my guess is that the types of gambling that people do will have probably changed and evolved. We couldn't have imagined 20 years ago that we'd have things like in-play betting. That simply could not happen without something like cloud computing. The fact that Bet365 can take 2 or 3 million calls in an ad break during a football match, there just wasn't the technological capability to do that. Not even 5 years ago. And now, of course, it's in a way, I've always said this, is that in terms of technological revolution, the two industries that always capitalise on first are the sex industry and the gambling industry. They learn how to use these new technologies to monetize their products. So of course, as soon as we had the internet, it was online porn and online gambling that were the first two activities to basically monetize their products and everything that they do.
Obviously, social gambling is a young industry, so this might be quite hard to answer, and there's going to be some speculation here, but how has social gambling impacted on gambling habits in general?
Right, in terms of how social gambling might impact on habits, there aren't enough people doing it at the moment to make any kind of guess about how it's impacting in other areas of their life. But with all of these things, there seem to be tipping points when people, there's, in terms of, social networking and the whole phenomena. Obviously there was, when it was just operating within a kind of college, university environment, when on a very local level, there came to a point where suddenly it just tipped out of that particular domain and went, almost exponential. Now that could happen in terms of social gambling. I don't see it happening anytime soon, just because the number of companies that are investing in, wanting to move their products from the pure social gaming market into the social gambling market, they're still very much just looking around thinking, you pointed out with Zynga, well, in fact, take someone like bwin, for instance. They put $50 million aside to set up their social gambling division, and as far as I know, they're not being allowed to do it at the moment. In fact, I did hear one report they were thinking of not even going into that market at all now. They just haven't been, in terms of what happened in Britain and with Bingo Frenzy, it didn't really take off in a way that people thought it would. The bottom line is, if companies can make money from games where people are not actually gambling, they'll continue to do that. But my guess is you always want as many kind of products in your portfolio as possible. But really, those kind of questions, it's best to ask somebody in the industry rather than somebody like myself who's outside looking in. I can see trends that happen, but there are things like social networking that honestly 10 years ago I could never have seen coming.
Well, in that case, hopefully this question will be sort of more within your remit to answer.
Okay.
Is there any proof that free casino-style games on social media act as a gateway to real money gambling? And moreover, are children who play these free games more likely to gamble in later life?
Okay, there's a number of issues there. Okay, the first one, and there's at least 3 or 4 studies now showing that one of the major risk factors for children gambling and children's problem gambling is playing free games. Mm-hmm. So that's both free games on, for instance, a legitimate online gambling site that allows kids to play a demonstration mode or a free play practice round, but also games like Texas Hold'em poker on social networking sites. Parents will often buy credits for their children, let them play, and they're obviously not actually winning any money, but of course what they are doing, those kids are being socially conditioned, behaviourally conditioned to actually know all the kind of rules of the game, know how to play. And of course, anecdotally, I know a number of children who just can't wait to be old enough to play on poker sites, for instance. They've been playing for points for so long, being very good at it, at least in their opinion, and wanting to be able to monetize their skills and make money from that. But going back to the original point, is there any evidence that playing free games is in any way dangerous? All the studies that I'm aware of, and okay, there have only been 3 or 4, but all of them have shown that playing free games is the number one risk factor for problem gambling in adolescence. So this is one of the things I work with many online gaming companies, and what I've told them is that even for their free games, it should actually be behind the registration process. You shouldn't, there's been a feeling that, we shouldn't worry that kids are playing for free, they're not losing any money. But what they are being is they're learning the rules of the game, they're being socially and behaviourally conditioned to play gambling type games. And of course what we know is that some companies, they operate what I would call a socially irresponsible practice of making the the kind of free and practice demonstration modes, the chances of winning there are much higher than when you actually gamble on the real site. So there's two things that I've said to operators they need to do. One is whatever the odds of playing your real games, they have to be reflected in the free play games as well. So if people play them all day and they realise that I only win 20% of the time, that has to be transferred between the free play and the real play. The second thing is that when you register, is that even free games should be behind the registration, that even to play the free games you'd have to register, and most companies, particularly the ones I work with, have very strict age verification techniques. It's very hard for children to actually gamble on their own. But having said that, we know there are parents out there that happily let their children gamble along with them. While that's happening, of course, is that children learn the passwords and whatever for adults' accounts. We also know there's some evidence that younger children use the debit and credit cards of older siblings to gamble on these types of things. So for me, having written 2 books on adolescent gambling, I've spent well over 20 years studying adolescent gambling in all its forms. Social gambling and social gaming and being able to play for free are one of the things that I do have concerns about, because it does seem to be that playing free games is, as you say, a gateway for some people to develop problems on gambling.
And for the sake of lay people, I know you say there have only been a small number of studies conducted, but without having, if you like, empirical addiction figures, given that social gambling is quite a new industry, how are these risk factors measured?
Right, what we do in a typical survey is that the 3 surveys that I can think of particularly, we do an adolescent national gambling survey, typically survey around about between 8,000 and 11,000 children. It's done on a representative school-based survey. We ask them about their lottery playing habits, their slot machine playing habits. We ask them about their social media use, social networking, etc. And what we do then is that we can obviously separate out people into different risk groups of non-gamblers, social gamblers, at-risk gamblers and problem gamblers. We use what's called the DSM criteria, which is the American Psychiatric Association criteria to measure problem and pathological gambling. Obviously this has been adapted for a child and adolescent audience. The current figure, the great news in terms of adolescent gambling is that the trend is downwards. So for instance, in the year 2000, the number of problem gamblers amongst the adolescent community, and that's the 11 to 15-year-old age group, was 5%. In 2006, it had gone down to 3%, and the latest survey shows it's down to 2% in terms of problem gambling. So, of those thousands of children that are interviewed for those national studies, the current rate is down from what it was 10 years ago, but it's still 2%, which is more than twice the adult problem gambling prevalence rate. But when we look at those 2% of children that have problems, what we do, we use a technique called multiple regression, where we throw everything into the mix. We throw their socio-demographic features, everything that we can think of is thrown into the mix, and what comes out of that is the things that basically predict what is causing or has an association with problem gambling. And the number one risk factor for problem gambling in the 11 to 15-year-old age group is playing free games, either through a legitimate gambling website where they're playing a demonstration game, or playing free games via Facebook.
Isn't there a slight contradiction there, in that it seems that the prevalence of free online games is inversely proportional to the number of young or adolescent people with a prevalence or predilection towards problem gambling? You'd think that given that there are a greater variety of free games now available, we'd see an increase in the number of adolescent problem gamblers.
The problem we're only looking at 2 main activities, which is the lottery and slot machines.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So the issue there is, and one of the things I've argued, is that we may be starting to witness a displacement effect of children not going into amusement arcades or trying to buy a scratch card or a lottery ticket from a newsagent is that they do things from their tablet, from their mobile phone. But the problem is that the way that particular survey is done, it's funded by the National Lottery Commission, and so they're most interested in children's lottery play. Slot machines have always been examined because they've been the activity in terms of commercial activity, the only activity they can legally do in terms of playing at seaside towns and family leisure centres. So when we're talking about problem we're not measuring problem gamblers in terms of their social gaming, because that's not an activity that's even looked at the moment in the context of those studies.
So do you feel if those figures were factored in and we had a more holistic view of the gaming habits of the youth in Britain, the figures might paint a very different story?
Well, no, because children are still in a position they can't really gamble on through social media yet. There's just not, we wouldn't have a higher, at the moment we don't have a higher prevalence of problem my guess is that what kids do now is they do lots of things on Facebook. I look at my own kids, I get all my best ideas from my kids. I can't think any of my 3 kids at the moment would find gambling something they want to do, but they would definitely play lots and lots of games and want money to download apps, and I think the kind of gambling add-on is something that will come to them when they're older. But no, I don't think I think those figures are representative of the fact that lots of companies like Camelot, for instance, have really tightened up in stopping children being able to gamble. There are now less opportunities for children, for instance, to gamble on slot machines. A lot of the single-site premises have disappeared now as a result of the Gambling Act. So you would expect to find a decrease. But of course, I think what's happened is that we've also seen that the prevalence of children playing the lottery, children playing slot machines, has diminished over the last 10 years. And my argument for that is it's being displaced by children playing video games, playing online role-playing games, and playing games on social media platforms.
In an essay on livecasino.co.uk, we put forward 2 perspectives. On the one hand, social gambling normalises gambling, thrusting a perceived vice into the public domain. But on the other hand, you could argue that this more transparent social experience means individuals with a tendency towards problem play need not suffer in silence. Their actions are visible for all to see. Where do you stand on these arguments, and what do you have to add?
I think both those are viable. I don't think it's an either-or situation. You could have a situation like you say. I mean, what I love, particularly in terms of the online world now, is that I have access to behavioural tracking data sets. We can see for the first time exactly what gamblers do. For all these years that I've spent interviewing people, doing surveys, and you ask people what they do online or what they do in terms of their gambling, and they say, I do this, this and this, and there's no way of verifying it. Now, in terms of whether it's a social media platform, whether it's an online role-playing game, or whether it's a site like 888.com, is that we can follow every single click, every single thing that the gambler does from the moment they log onto the site to the moment they log off. So in that sense, in terms of transparency, companies have that data, and I believe they should be using that data to obviously protect players and to minimise harm. In terms of the impact on players themselves, well, the 2 positions that you have, I think both of them are kind of viable, and there's probably other kind of I don't think they're the only 2 options. There could be other things that, in terms of what happens to people's behaviour, as those as I say, for youngsters, I think the social conditioning that happens with games, it looks very innocuous. But of course, when you add a money element onto it, it can, for a small minority, it can become something that's a problem to them. And we know that youth in and of themselves are a vulnerable group. Whether it's alcohol use, cigarette use, underage sex, gambling, these are all what I would call a lifestyle cluster of risky behaviours that children and adolescents start to engage in. And when you find a problem gambler, you'll probably also find somebody that's taking illicit drugs, started drinking alcohol earlier, engaging in underage sex earlier. It's you can't see gambling in isolation. It's one of those things that it's part of an adolescent development. It's rites of passage. But a lot of these things, if you're a parent that drinks and smokes and gambles in front of your children all the time, it shouldn't be a surprise that when children reach adolescence, they want to do those behaviours as well. It's what we call social hereditary factors, where basically children mimic what their parents or their guardians are doing.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you a few questions about physical casinos in Britain. What is your view on British casinos branching out into Vegas-style leisure and entertainment complexes? How do you feel the British casino has evolved as a social space?
The honest answer is here, I'm lucky because I travel all over the world and I see lots of casinos all over the world. And when my international visitors come over here and I have to take them to a British casino, I mean Nottingham here, we've got 5 casinos here. We're actually very lucky. We have outside London, I think the biggest proportion of casinos outside of London. They cannot believe how small our casinos are, how limited it is in terms of what you can do in our casinos. So of course, if we want to compete on the international stage and bring in, a kind of Atlantic City or Las Vegas or Macau type experience, we're going to have to radically change our casino structure. Because at the moment, even the biggest ones, you could fit, 20 or 30 of them into, the typical type Las Vegas type casino. Now, obviously, what the Gambling Act did, that was a step for me in the right direction in the sense that casinos became a place where people go to do lots of different things. Now I now probably go to my casino maybe once every 6 months. I do it less now. But when I go in, I have my cheap cordon bleu meal. Okay, it might be a tenner. Okay, for really good quality food at a really cheap price. Slightly subsidised pints, that are cheaper than in the pub. I'll have 2 hours at the roulette table. When I walk out at the end of the evening, I may have been in there 4 or 5 hours, usually with friends, quite often with international visitors when I go. I walk out at the end of the night and I've probably spent £35, £40. Now that's actually cheaper than me watching Nottingham Forest lose. That's actually cheaper than me watching Noel Gallagher at the arena. For a night out, to be fed, drunk and have a good time, 35, 40 quid compared to the things I do is actually really good value. But I'm buying entertainment. Now the thing is, there's a difference between those people who go to casinos because all they want to do is win money, and people like myself who want a lovely social experience with friends that if I win is a complete bonus. So, we're in a situation now in this country where we could have had super casinos in this country, and it was all because when Gordon Brown came in, he was basically anti-gambling and decided that the one super casino that had been given to Manchester, was going to go by the wayside. Now, people were really surprised that the super casino was even going to go to Manchester in the first place, but I think one of the reasons it went to Manchester, because people like me, myself and a guy called Paul Bellringer, we were the co-founders of GamCare, we designed their social responsibility policy. I think the Labour government didn't want to bring in a super casino and have loads of people ending up with problems, so they chose the site and the operators who would have the best infrastructure in terms of player protection, harm minimisation and social responsibility. I was very proud to be part of that bid, and everyone thought it would go to Blackpool, it would go to Sheffield or whatever. It went to Manchester, and I think people actually did read the bids and they thought about the longer term psychosocial impacts of casinos. Now, I think at some point any government is going to realise if we want people to come to Britain and we want to compete on the international stage, is that we're going to have super casinos. People do like to gamble. Now, what I've said is that what you don't have is super casinos built right in the centre of a town. I mean, one of the things that Blackpool things that was going against their bid was that the casino where it was going to be placed was in one of the most socially deprived areas. For me, you have to have an out-of-town thing that people have to make a dedicated decision that they want to go. Now, when I go to Las Vegas, I'm lucky that I go there for academic reasons as well, but basically most people that go to Las Vegas, they know that they're going there to gamble. When you walk into a casino, you know that you're going to gamble. People have made a pre-commitment and a previous decision, and that's what they're going to do. So in terms of this country, I can see definitely a future Conservative or Labour government introducing maybe 4 to 6 super casinos across the country as something that will bring in tourists, and actually will be something that will actually regenerate some of those areas. I'm not anti-gambling in the slightest, and if there's a desire for people to gamble and they want to gamble on those types of things, why do we have so many people going to Las Vegas? It's because we don't get that over here, and it's a completely different cultural experience. My guess is that if we had those super casinos here, people would go in their droves to gamble there.
I mean, the word on the street seems to be actually that people are gambling less in Vegas. They're still going. The number of tourists every year is actually increasing since the doldrums of 2008. But the motivation behind the visits are less gambling and more sort of a holistic travel, entertainment, family holiday.
I went there for a family holiday. Obviously, my kids couldn't gamble, so what did we do? We went to the Grand Canyon. We went to the Hoover Dam. There are loads of things around there that don't involve gambling. But I was there on Memorial Weekend, and of course that was mostly young people aged 18 to 30 who were just there to gamble and gamble. That's all they were there to do. But of course there are other places. I went to Macau last year. That is just that is not something that's in recession. That's every year is year on year increases in terms of people going there to gamble. What do Macau do differently? Well, they have far more table games in proportion to slots, whereas in Las Vegas it's predominantly slot machines. Maybe it's a case that people want different types of gambling experience, and Las Vegas has to move and realise that there are different ways that people gamble now. Traditionally it's always been that slots make the money, but Macau has shown you that you can have a much greater proportion of table games and still be highly profitable.
Okay.
We did some research for some of the Canadian gaming organisations back in the mid-2000s, and we talked about what we called a centralised gaming model, which is basically destination resort gambling, saying it in a way that's probably the most socially responsible way of controlling gambling, is having a mecca for people to come where there are just dozens and dozens of casinos. That's what people go to Las Vegas for, is to see all the sights, the sounds, and experience the culture. We could do something like this in this country, but my kind of proviso would be that it has to be outside of a major city. It has to be somewhere people effectively have got to travel to, so they make a pre-commitment to do it. But for me, I think it's much better, for instance, to have maybe 1,000 slot machines housed in a small number of locations, rather than having 2 or 3 and lots spread all over a particular city. I think the problem we've got, of course, is we've got lots of what I call ambient gambling experiences now, where you could be going into one premises, so let's say to get some chips, but you end up gambling. You didn't go in there to gamble, but because there happens to be a gambling opportunity in there, you take the choice, you take that kind of impulse. I think I'll have a go on that. The thing about a casino or a bingo hall or amusement arcade or a bookmaker is when you walk in, you know that you've gone into that that particular location to gamble. So the idea of having a destination resort that has maybe 15, 20 different casinos, I'm not anti that at all. What you do have to think about, though, is the local indigenous population. What because those people are going to live there all the time. What are you going to do to protect those people in terms of gambling problems? Because you look at Las Vegas. Why do people who actually live in Las Vegas have the highest proportion of gambling problems in the world? Because they have absolute accessibility and saturation of gambling products in that area.
As you'll remember, the Labour government's 2005 plans for a series of super casinos would have precipitated a shift to Vegas-style complexes, but these plans were shelved due to concerns over the social impact of these kinds of resorts, all these complexes. You sort of already touched on it, but I hope you could maybe elaborate on your thoughts vis-à-vis this position.
Well, to be honest, the real reason why super casinos were stopped is that Gordon Brown, it was his first decision when he took over from Tony Blair as a Presbyterian. He was basically anti-gambling. And that was a classic top-down decision that was made. And I know for a fact that Gordon Brown, who knew the head of Manchester City Council who'd got the super casino, basically told him, this is what I'm going to do. We'll have to think of other ways that we can regenerate money in Manchester. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think there's anything else but basically a single decision made by the top man for there not to be a super casino. He probably thought that was a vote winner. Okay, there were, obviously, I know in the run-up to the decision about who was going to get the super casino, there were, the papers were full of gambling stories. I know in terms of the proportion of media that I did in the kind of 4 years pre-September the 1st, right up to when the Gambling Act came in, is that this was people wanted to know what the consequences of a super casino was going to be in their particular area. And of course, I think a lot of people, whether it was a faith group or whether it was anti-gambling groups, were basically saying this is going to cause mass problems on our doorstep. My argument is that there could be a potential to do that, but I think there are lots of ways that we could minimise harm, bring in protective measures to minimise any of those people developing a problem. In terms of regeneration of an area as well, is that my guess is that the overall benefits would probably be more than the disadvantages, but of course we have to weigh up whether those, do we count it in terms of number of people or the amount of money or whatever. I mean, there's different ways of working out cost-benefit analysis of doing something like that. But the decision not to go forward with the super casinos, because each year the plans were revised. Initially it was going to be maybe 20 super casinos, then it was down to 8, then it was down to 4, then it was down to 1, and it just seemed to be that there was a lot of public pressure that communities saying we don't want these casinos. But to be honest, people didn't want the lottery. People did not want the national lottery. If you said now we're going to get rid of the national lottery now, there'd be a public outcry. I mean, it's so embedded within British culture. My guess is if you had a destination resort, again, what you'd have is something that, England would probably be proud of. And again, even though I've spent my lifetime researching problem gambling, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a super casino. I say I'd be a hypocrite because I do gamble myself, I do go to destination resorts, I do gamble at destination resorts. Why shouldn't I have the opportunity to do that here in my own country? As long as the operator is socially responsible in terms of how they advertise and market their products, decide what they're going to do in terms of protecting their clientele, I've got no problems with that whatsoever.
Again, this draws on themes we've been discussing throughout, but how do you think British casinos and British casino culture compares with that across the world? I know you've already said that you don't really feel that British casino culture is distinct.
No, I mean, right. The problem with British casino culture is that we've not really got a British casino culture, in the sense that our casinos are so small, parochial. Yes, they offer. We've obviously got a hardcore clientele that goes to those casinos. But what's amazing, so here in Nottingham, for instance, our biggest casino, when you walk in, even on a Friday or Saturday night, it still looks relatively empty. We haven't got a culture in this country that people go to casinos regularly. We probably have a lot of kind of high rollers in London, etc., who come in, want to gamble high stakes and go out again. The typical kind of city casinos, my guess is it attracts a very small proportion of those local communities. They're not seen as a kind of destination. They're probably just not very exciting. You could walk past a lot of these casinos and not even know it's there. You can't walk past a Las Vegas or Atlantic City or a Macau casino without realising it's a casino. So I really, in terms of the prevalence of people who go in a casino, less than 5% have visited a casino in the last year, and that's those people may have visited just once. The number of regular casino goers is minimal. Okay, now obviously that minimal amount is generating a lot of profits for the casino industry across the country, so it means they're spending a lot for those who do go in there. But we really haven't got what I would call, we've got 120 casinos approximately in this country. I mean, if we had 10 super casinos, okay, I think that would probably generate more money and bring in more visitors and tourists and what have you. But I don't think there is an identifiable British casino culture. I mean, my guess is you ask a casino gambler and they will disagree with me. And I do, I'm one of those, 3 or 4% who go, and I do go more than once a year to a casino. Yes, it's probably part of my job, because obviously when I go in, I play a slot machine in a casino, I call it research. But the fact is that, not, in terms of the British population, they're not really a nation of casino gamblers, at least not yet.
And moving away from British casinos and British casino culture, if indeed there is a British casino culture more generally, casino design is often described as an exercise in psychology. What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, it's that, well, any design of any commercial environment uses psychology. Okay. Now, when it comes to casino design and just basic gambling venue design, there are whole loads of things that are used in terms of basically either to get you in the casino in the first place, and once you're in the casino, to get you gambling more and more. So, for instance, tactics that use in America, for instance, giving free drinks. That's an on-floor situational characteristic that is used to keep people gambling. Now, we don't have it here in this country, and in fact, it's against Gambling Commission guidelines to offer free alcohol. But things like floor layout, like if you go into, say, the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, okay, if you want to go and watch, say, which I did, REM in the arena there, it took me half an hour from when I walked in the entrance to get to the auditorium. In that half an hour, I must have passed, 10 or 15,000 slot machines before I got there. Of course, I had to pass it, when I came out, I had to do it all the way back again. In terms of what's happening while I'm walking through, every time somebody wins on a slot machine, it plays a musical tune, or either ka-chunk, 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 little, But the thing is, of course, you've got 1,000 machines there, maybe 20 of them are paying out, and all you can hear is the sound of winning. The 980 machines that you can't hear the sound of losing. this is all psychology that is used to maximise. It's called what we psychologists call the availability bias. It's about emphasising wins and de-emphasising losing. Why is it? On the lottery show each week when it first started, people like Dale Winton used to say, "Hey, we've got Mrs. Jones on this week. She won 3.4 million last week. Here's here's Mr. Evans. He won 2.1 million last week." What they didn't show was here's the 29.9 million people that didn't win a single thing last week. Now, these are that's another example of the availability bias. But things like the refreshments being on site, things like live entertainment, these are all designed to get people in. People might have come in to watch a show, but of course they want you to have a gamble while you're there. They've brought you into a fantastic restaurant to eat, but while you're there they hope you'll spend some money gambling. These are all kind of lost leaders, but in terms of the way that it's designed, okay, casino design is absolutely critical. There's been a whole load of research on what we call service-scapes, is looking at what the best environments are to take money off people in terms of lighting, colour. I mean, things like colour are very important. Reds, oranges, yellows, these are kind of exciting colours that are very much associated with gambling. Okay, it's ironic actually that someone like Gala, casino that I gamble at, their corporate colour is blue. And from a psychological perspective, that is a really kind of calming colour. It's not probably the best in a gambling environment. So things like, we've done experiments here at Nottingham Trent University. So for instance, I'm very interested in how music affects gambling. What we've shown is that if you play high beats per minute music while people are gambling, they spend more money. We've manipulated light. We've shown that gamblers spend more under red, they'll gamble faster and spend more under red light than they do under white light. So these in Las Vegas, been a number of experiments showing that if you spray machines with certain types of odour, they can increase the takings on the machine. These are all examples of environmental influence. Okay, now most of those actually I don't think have a massive impact on addiction. Don't have a massive impact on problem gambling. What these have an impact on is usually getting people to gamble on something in the first place. Okay, there may be a little bit in terms of maintaining, but really it's the structural characteristics of the activity itself that dictate if you're vulnerable or susceptible whether you'll develop a problem. But of course, and you get all these stories of supposedly casinos pumping oxygen in to keep people in. The fact there's no clocks around, people can't tell what time it is. All these things happen. There are psychological reasons why they happen. Most of those I don't think have a massive impact in terms of problem gambling. But they may actually keep someone like myself who's a social gambler in there a little bit longer, spending a little bit more money, but it probably won't turn me into a problem gambler. It's more like to be the structural characteristics.
In the next set of questions we're going to focus on specific casino games and particular gambling activities. Now, you've done a lot of research surrounding the psychology of different casino games, and one of your first projects involves studying slot games. Can you please summarise your key findings for us?
Well, I've never stopped researching slot machines. I mean, I've published papers on slot machines almost every year. Mm-hmm. Okay, my perspective comes from the factors. When I first started, I was looking at to what extent slot machines were being played by children, to what effect slot machines had on children. Most of my early studies showed that slot machines were the only commercial activity that children can gamble on. That a small proportion did seem to have addictive-like patterns that you would find in either more traditional addictions or other types of gambling addictions that you find in adults. I've never stopped researching in slot machines. I mean, now my research, I look at the individual factors, I look at the situational factors, the structural factors. What interests me most now is I think most people realise that there are always individual risk factors within a person themselves that make them more vulnerable to develop addictions of one sort or another. And when people talk about things like addictive personality, which I don't believe at all, because I don't think there is a set of personality traits that predicts addiction and addiction alone. However, there are certainly predisposing factors. So we know there are genetic and biological factors. Okay, so whether it's a slot machine player or whether it's a horse race gambler, is that, for instance, if you have a particular set of genetic markers, there's a gene called the DRD2 gene, nothing to do with Star Wars, but it's one of these genes that is implicated in lots of different impulsive behaviours. So, for instance, there was a really classic study that was done back in the 1990s that showed that basically 50% of pathological gamblers had this particular genetic variant, and that 25% of non-pathological gamblers had this particular genetic variant. Now, there are two implications from that. One is that even if you haven't got the gene, you might still become a problem gambler, because 50% of problem gamblers didn't have this genetic variation. Also shows that even if you've got this genetic variant, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to become a problem gambler. There are lots of other factors as well. And of course, I'm very much interested in what are the other psychological, structural and situational factors that develop. Now, when it comes to slot machines, you hear this phrase that slot machines, fixed odds betting terminals, video lottery terminals, pokie machines in Australia, people use this phrase that they're the crack cocaine of gambling. And what they mean by that is that there's a high association between slot machines and problem gambling. Now, I wrote a paper earlier this year, and I wrote that basically the type of game is irrelevant in terms of developing addiction. And people thought, that how can you say that, Mark? There's all this evidence that it's quite clearly it's to do with game. And I said, no, it's not to do with the game, it's to do with the structural characteristics. Okay, so what my research on slot machine has shown is that the single most important factor in terms of whether people develop a problem or not, if you are that vulnerable or susceptible person, if you've got that biological or genetic predisposition, if you have a particular set of psychological characteristics, the biggest single factor that will dictate whether you become addicted to a particular game is event frequency of the activity. And what I mean by that is that a typical slot machine in a pub, you can gamble 12 times a minute on a typical pub slot machine. To take the national lottery, you can only gamble, or at least find out the result if you gamble twice a week on a national lottery. Okay? I've never met anybody addicted to the national lottery. You can't become addicted to something that you're only rewarded for twice a week. You can buy lots of tickets, you can buy lots of, but you can only find out the result of your gamble twice a week. So you can only be, unless you're some bizarre person that gets a buzz from actually buying the lottery ticket in and of itself, is you can't become addicted to a discontinuous gambling activity. That's why I've never come across anybody addicted to football pools, I've never come across anybody addicted to a bi-weekly national lottery. But what you tend to find is that activities like horse race gambling or sports betting, where you can gamble again and again and again and again, they are the activities that tend to be problematic. Now, the thing is, people have looked at the research and said, we find, what you find in all the research studies is that slot machines have a high association with problem gambling. And people say, well, it must be the game then. But the thing is, I could design you the safest slot machine in the world, and I guarantee no one will ever become addicted to it. And the only thing I would do is just change the structural characteristics and make sure that people can only press the button twice a week. No one will ever become addicted to a slot machine. Now you say I might be being facetious, but the thing is, I could design you the most addictive lottery game. Okay, we can take the lottery game as it is now, the bi-weekly game, and instead of having the draw every twice a week, we'll have the draw every 2 minutes. Okay, now there are games like that, it's called Keno in the US. Okay, they have a fast action lottery draw where the draws are every 2 minutes. They're often played in post offices, supermarkets, and I can tell you now, people that play those types of games do develop problems if you're vulnerable or susceptible. So it's not the game, it's not to demonise fixed odds betting terminals or to demonise slot machines. It's about the structural characteristics of how you design. If you design basically a high event frequency game, and that can be a lottery and that can be a slot machine, if you're vulnerable or susceptible, there's a high risk you will develop a problem with that particular product.
I suppose the popular high variance online slot machines where you can put on auto spin and...
Exactly, the event frequency there can be 30 or 40 times a minute. Now I remember, this is the true story actually, in 1996 my work was used in the Dutch Parliament to decide whether slot machines, the spin of the reel, should be 3.5 or 3.6 seconds. Because basically, and at the time, obviously Holland had guilders then rather than euros, but of course the machine industry wanted it to be 3.5 seconds, okay, because obviously that tenth of a second, okay, is that in terms of the money they can make, the faster you make the reel spins, the more money you make in the end, because all those tenths of a second add up when you times it by the thousands and thousands of slot machines times the number of players playing them every single day across the year. Now that's just a tenth of a second. But like you say, online, I've seen online slot machines. You can gamble 30 or 40 times on a slot machine. Now, if you tie up event frequency with high accessibility, so the thing we also know about is that problem gambling is very much related to the opportunities to gamble within a particular area. So if you've got a high event frequency activity with a highly accessible product, those two factors alone, if you're vulnerable or susceptible, will have a major impact in terms of developing a problem. That's, we know that, again, I just gave you the example before, the highest prevalence of problem gambling in the world is in Las Vegas, because it's the most saturated environment that's got gambling products. But of course now, We all have Las Vegas in our front room in terms of the tablets, mobiles, internet that we gamble on. We've got 3,000 online gambling sites that we can go to at the push of a button. So effectively, we now do have high accessibility. Now, if you add in another structural characteristic, jackpot size, we know that huge jackpots, okay, get people to gamble in the first place. That's a structural characteristic that is usually associated with acquisition, getting people to gamble. We know on rollover weeks on the lottery, far more people gamble when there's a rollover week. So if I wanted to design you the most addictive activity, I'd design you a slot machine that has a chance of winning £1 million per spin in a highly accessible area. And of course, where do you find those things? You find them in Las Vegas, Atlantic City. We're talking about the situation and structural factors coming together. Then you start to throw in lots of other things. I mean, we recently did a review and we found over 70 different structural characteristics within a slot machine. So another really important one is something that we call the psychology of the near miss. Okay, so in all slot machines, most scratch cards, in fact most games have what we call near miss experiences. So typically on a slot machine, the reels are lined up, the reels are there, and if you match 3, say, fruit symbols in a line, win a prize. But if reel spins lemon, reel spins lemon, reel spins lemon, just above or just below the pay line, that's a near miss. The thing we found in my research, for instance, in my early research, I used to measure people's heart rates while they were actually gambling. I used to get them to think aloud while they were gambling. Okay, what came through very clearly from that is that people get aroused, not only when they won, but also when they experience these near misses. What I also found is that gamblers, the more problematic you become, is that gamblers themselves start to create near misses themselves. So if I put a match, if I put a bet on tomorrow that England are going to beat Germany, and it ends up being 1-0 and it's a penalty that was given to German, as a hardcore gambler, I might say so. I would have won my money if that referee hadn't given that stupid decision in the 67th minute to award a penalty. I turn what was clearly a losing experience, I validate it and turn it into a one where I would have won if nothing happened. So the question I'm always asked by people, why do gamblers consistently gamble if they're constantly losing? Gamblers don't constantly lose. Gamblers constantly nearly win. And that nearly winning is physiologically reinforcing and it's psychologically reinforcing as well. So that's why slot machines are the perfect example of giving lots and lots of near-miss experiences. They're pre-programmed to do that. Scratch cards, in terms of the way they're designed. Anytime you scratch off a scratch card, you might scratch off the third soon, 25 quid, you've got another 4 things to scratch off, hope that 25 will come up, doesn't come up. But you still felt aroused that you nearly won on that. So that's a classic. So when you've got high event frequency and you couple it with near miss, and then you add in the sounds of the coins dropping in to the tray, that acoustic, whether it's music playing, whatever, all these things have an impact in terms of changing your psychology. So for instance, I did a lot of research in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s on the Simpsons slot machines. I mean, what happened? I mean, when I first started researching slot machines, if you looked at the names of slot machines back in 1986, 1987, they were called things like Cash Point, Cash Line, Action Bank, Piggy Bank, Money Belt. These are all names that suggested this is where you can get money from, not where you can lose it. There were names where they're what I would call acoustically attractive names: Nifty 50, Naughty but Nice, Real Fun, spelled R-E-E-L. Basically, all the machines were obviously, I don't think naming has any impact on addiction, but it's an acquisitional factor that might get you to play. But of course, what we saw over the 2000s is that most slot machines started going over to basically use the psychology of familiarity. So you associate your slot machine with a popular TV program, or a popular film, popular game like Trivial Pursuits or Monopoly, a popular video game like Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever. All the machines were linked, and what they're basically saying is that you know something about me already before you've even played. You've played Sonic, or you've played Monopoly, or you've watched Coronation Street or EastEnders. You walk into a pub and you hear the you hear the Simpsons theme tune. You immediately know what that is. Here's the Simpsons. It appeals right across gender, age. I mean, they're just universally popular. There was at least 5 different Simpsons slot machines. You put your money in a Simpsons slot machine, and Krusty the Clown says, "I knew you'd come crawling back." Bit of humour. You just at a point where you've gambled your money and you lose. Homer shouts out, "Don't!" Just at the point you lose, reduces the guilt about the fact you've just lost. Loads of machines use verbal interaction cues, use humour as a way of minimising the fact that you're losing. It's just brilliant psychology that's used in the design of machines. Now, for me, it all comes back to the single most important factor is event frequency. It's how often you can gamble on that product. You know, if you can't gamble on that product regularly, you can't develop a problem. So, and again, it's a really important point. It's not that slot machines or fixed odds betting terminals are more addictive. It's that they are games that are designed with high event frequencies, and that's associated with problem gambling.
In your research, you've drawn parallels between slot game and video game addiction. I wondered if you could maybe elaborate on that connection.
Yeah, well, what became very clear when I started my PhD was when I was going into amusement arcades, and a lot of my original research was just pure observational research. What I started to notice, there wasn't a great deal of difference between the typical adolescent slot machine player and the typical adolescent video game player. The only real difference is that obviously video games tend to be far more skillful than slot machines. And I described in a 1991 paper, I got lambasted at the time for this, but I described video games as a non-financial form of gambling, which seems a paradox given that the whole basis of gambling is it's based on being able to win more money. But I argued that behaviourally, these two activities were almost identical. The only difference is that money was you gambled slot machines to win money, but you played video games to gain points. Now, in terms of things like the near miss, I mean, near miss is used all the time in video games. Designers put near miss, near win elements, and the thing is, when you've just failed to do something, the only way you can get rid of that frustration, what we call cognitive regret, is to play straight again. And that's what happens with slot machines as well. When we've just lost, basically it's just pressing the button. That's what happens on video games as well. But in terms of what we call operant conditioning, the idea of having small, unpredictable rewards keeps people persisting for longer. We find that in video games, and we find it in slot machines. What I basically did, I wrote paper after paper showing that in terms of event frequency, in terms of the psychology of the near miss, in terms of colours, in terms of sound. Like, for instance, I remember doing an experiment where I got people to play Tetris with and without music and measured their heart rates, and I found that even though people found the Tetris theme annoying, is that they were far more aroused when the music was on playing it than when it was off. Now, things like that, the influence of sound, the influence of colour, the event frequency, operant conditioning. What I was saying is that all these things, the only real difference between video games and slot machines were the skill level and the fact one was played for points and one was played for money. And in fact, every hardcore slot machine player, remember on a typical slot machine, if you go into a pub, the most you can win is maybe 70 quid. I mean, it's just infinitesimally small compared to most other gambling activities where you can win a lot more. Most hardcore slot machine players do not play to win money. They play with money rather than for it, and their whole philosophy is to stay on the machine as long as possible using the least amount of money. And that's identical to what video game players do. They put when I was playing Space Invaders and Galaxians, I put my 10 pence and I would see how long I can make that 10 pence last. Slot machine players do the same thing. They walk into an arcade with £10. A good day is when they make that £10 last 5 hours. A bad day is when that £10 goes in 10 minutes. Okay, now that's, the thing about slot machine players and video game players, in slot machine, the money is a way of keeping score. It's exactly, so when I talked about this idea of video game playing being a non-financial form of gambling, obviously I came from a world where I'd spent 4 years researching gambling and then realised there were commonalities in the psychology of video game playing. I didn't come from the other way. Now, of course, gambling and gaming is starting to converge. All the kind of psychological techniques that are used in terms of repetitive play in video games are used in slot machines.
Vice versa, Skinner's box.
Yeah, exactly. Skinner box is operant conditioning. That's exactly what it is. If I want, the thing is, even with near misses, near misses, they have to be at a certain level. So some of my colleagues in Canada, they found out the optimum kind of percentage for near misses to work is between about 37 to 42%. Thing is, if you give near misses all the time, it's a bit like cry wolf. You know that I never win. But what they do, there's like an optimum level, and round about a third, just over a third of times you get a near miss is enough to keep you playing again and again. Now, video games work on the same principle. They give you lots of near winning experiences, and I say that the psychological feelings in terms of what people feel while they're playing slot machines or video games seem to be very similar. The body's physiology in terms of arousal while you're playing, or escape and relaxing, de-stressing. These are all commonalities that you find. So that's why, I kind of I do as much on video game addiction as I do on slots now. And I think, in terms of what's happening with youngsters, is that they're probably now playing more games than gambling type games. Whereas 10 years ago, you would have got a small proportion playing slots and buying scratch cards, etc. We've got less happening now, and they're probably playing more social games or more video games, because that's what they can do at home.
Okay, moving away from slots now, blackjack and roulette remain the most popular casino games. How do you account for their popularity from a psychological perspective? What gratifications do they offer gamblers?
Okay, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that people talk about the psychology of gambling, and really there isn't a psychology of gambling, because the psychology of playing a slot machine is totally different from the psychology of playing poker, which is totally different from the psychology of horse racing, which is totally different from the psychology of playing roulette. Roulette, obviously, I play roulette, okay, and I never play roulette to win money. For me, it's about maximising the amount that I'm prepared to lose. So typically, I mean, in the casino here, I go to my Gala casino, they still have 50p chips. And typically what I do, I'll put £5 worth of 50p chips all over the board. I've probably got 2/3 of the numbers covered. Okay. Now that strategy means that, I can make basically, with just £20, I can usually make that last 2 or 3 hours. Okay, that's what I do. I'm trying to maximise play. Occasionally I've done that strategy and I've lost everything in 15 minutes. When I've lost, and I stop playing. Now, the psychology of playing poker, obviously, poker, blackjack, these are games that if you're good and know what you're doing, you do actually have a good chance of winning. We wouldn't have, the same people winning the World Poker Championships again and again and again if it wasn't a game of skill. Now, there are chance elements in terms of the cards that you're dealt, and that's what you do. The psychology is playing with the hand that you've been dealt. But blackjack, what I find amazing about that, when Edward Thorpe wrote his 1962 book on how to win at blackjack, and show basically if you're a good card counter, you've got better odds of winning than the casino. Now, of course, when you get card counters who go into a casino, the casino do lots of things, including have at least 8 or 10 decks in there, so your memory's got to be superb. But really, they see card counting as cheating. For me, that's skill. But what they do is anyone that's caught card counting is classed as a cheater, which to me is just despicable beyond anything I can think of. But the thing is, even with card counting, you have to do it for a long time, even to get a small, kind of small profit. So Dominic O'Brien, the world memory champion, he went out, spent 8 weeks in Vegas, and he came out after 8 weeks, and I think he'd won sort of $8,000 to $10,000 over 8 weeks. In terms of making a living, you can't make your living card counting. Poker, of course, much more skillful game. Obviously it's as much about psychology of making your opponents think you've got certain cards or not got certain cards as much as it is about what you've been dealt. So there's loads of psychology in poker, but of course poker is a zero-sum game. There are winners at the expense of losers. There are a very small number of consistent winners, means there's an incredibly large amount of consistent losers there as well. But of course, anything that's got skill in, people think that if I practice, I play, I can get better, I can make, and we do get, and we had an example here at this university, somebody who left to become a professional poker player. Now, my guess is for everyone who leaves and is successful, there's another 999 that don't have any success at all in terms of making a living out of it. So the psychology of poker, to me, it's just very easy to understand. Here is something, it's a bit like any other skill game. If you practice, you persist, put in the hours, you could potentially make money from it. But the bottom line is that even the people who are made and call themselves professional, they might have to play 14 hours a day just to earn a living. Yet if they got out a job that they could work 7 hours a day, they could probably make just as much by putting in less effort and energy to do that. But really, I mean, that's, I'm a psychologist, I'm very much interested in the psychology of all of this, but it's amazing how many games, even the ones that are truly chance-based, people develop skill orientations. There's a whole load of social psychological research that shows even in things like, so given, let's say you buy a lottery ticket. There's experiments showing that if you've personally bought a lottery ticket, if someone says how much would you sell it for, okay, if you've chosen it yourself, okay, you ask for more money than if somebody was assigned to you. It shows that somehow that you actually actively picking that lottery had some choice in what happened. I mean, it's a skill orientation where there clearly is no skill orientation at all. So we know even in chance events like scratch cards, lotteries, is that some people develop skill orientation. That might be linked to potential problem gambling in some people. But like slots in this country, I mean, a lot of my work, I didn't realise anything about adaptive logic and the fact we didn't have a random number generator until the mid-2000s. So all of my work, going right back to my first published papers in the late 1980s, were effectively, I was assuming that the slot machines I was talking about were the same as the ones that were in America. So a lot of my conclusions that I made actually were not. So all these players were telling me it was skillful to do this, this and this, and I rubbished them in the papers going, it's just a chance event. They actually knew what they were talking about. you know, and I had to then go back and basically revalidate everything I'd done for the first 15 years of my research, because I built it on the wrong premise. And the thing is, even when I go now and I talk in America or Canada, and I talk about, you know, people give these myths about, you know, slot machine players, and I'll go, but they're not myths in the UK, and they say, no, that's rubbish, they're a chance. I'm going, no, they're not, because we don't use a random number generator. You know, the idea of watching watching a machine fill up with lots of other people's money without them winning anything does mean it's more likely that when you go on that, doesn't guarantee, but you are more likely to get a payout if you've just seen the machine fill up with hundreds of pounds of somebody else's money. And of course in America and Canada they'll say, no, that's not the point. So really, you know, there is a different psychology for every different form of gambling. As I say, roulette is one of those that, you know, people talk about the double up strategy. That double up strategy obviously does work if you have an unlimited amount of money. You know, so I remember a true story. I was in my local casino and 7 reds had come up on roulette in a row, and of course then people were putting loads of money on black. You know, they basically were applying the law of averages in the short term to the playing situation. This is classic gambler's fallacy, is that, you know, what we're talking about here is people that just expect the black to come up, because there's been 7 reds in a row, can't be another red. Of course there was another red, then there was another red. No, it was 11 reds in a row. It's the most I've ever seen, that I personally have experienced. And of course, if you've got an unlimited amount of money, you know, just betting on, you know, basically double the amount each time, you will eventually get your money back and more, but you could be literally into hundreds of thousands of pounds before doing that if you were, you know, gambling 11 or 12 times in a row and it was going against you. It's amazing if you start at 1 and double it, how quickly the money goes up. But, you know, with roulette, for me, it isn't about winning. You know, for me, it's about taking part and maximising my fun while I'm doing it. But occasionally, and again, I had a really good example in Stockholm, where we all got given 100 krona. Every conference delegate got given 100 krona to play in the casino Cosmopol, where we were staying. And, you know, at the end of the night, I came out and I had something like 450 krona, so about 40 quid plus. And it was a complete bonus. You know, I came out a winner, especially because it wasn't even my money to start with. It was, you know, it's absolutely brilliant. But roulette, you know, completely different psychology. I say some people just play the numbers, some people, you know, some people just play the colours, some people are just all about the number, their lucky number or whatever. But that's a completely different psychology to poker, because obviously there's no skill in roulette whatsoever.
Now, you've mentioned the gambler's fallacy. Could you quickly explain what's meant by this and how it affects players on a psychological level?
Yeah, well, the gambler, right, we in psychology, we talk about heuristics. Okay, now heuristics are these things that are, another word for it is rules of thumb. And what gamblers love doing is, particularly when it comes to something like, you know, simple heads or tails or red or black on a roulette wheel, is they look at past behaviour that's happened on the wheel or whatever, and they try and extrapolate what they think will happen. And basically what they're doing is applying the law of averages, which, I mean, the law of averages are infinite, and they try and apply it to a short-term situation. So for instance, if you're in a coin tossing game and there have been 5 heads in a row, okay, people will probably say, well, the law of averages, a tail has got to come up next, even though there's an independent 50-50 chance of another same side of the coin coming down again. And of course that's, you know, all these things are totally independent of each other. You could theoretically get 30 heads in a row. Okay, it's unlikely, but you can. And of course that's what people do in gambling situations, is that when, you know, people will talk about, there's 2 ways that people will go. So if you've seen red come up 7 times on a row in a roulette wheel, some gamblers will say, oh, that's a hot streak for reds, I'm going to put all my money on red, because there's obviously a hot, you know, reds are having a hot streak. Other people will say, the gambler's fallacy, the law of averages, it's got to be a black next go. Now the thing is, both of those put their money on, and if they win, they'll go, see, my logic worked out for me. Okay, or if it doesn't work out, the thing about heuristics is no predictive validity to them. You can't work out before whether they're going to help you or not. You can only use them retrospectively. But really, you know, people just don't realise that most gambling activities are purely chance, and that each event is independent of the last one, and that's why, as I say, you see the gambler's fallacy. Particularly, you know, roulette is the classic one where you see where people, you know, use it all the time. If 3 or 4 colours have come up the same, is that they'll usually bet against that colour on the next one.
In recent years, the online casino industry has witnessed a rise in the popularity of live casinos and live games. How do you explain this popularity? are consumers just more likely to trust a live game over a virtual game?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. Right, I always say that when I play an online slot machine or I play an online roulette wheel, I'm basically playing with imaginary dice. You know, it's just on the pure behest of what that computer program is. If I gamble on the internet, then I gamble on, on a football match or a race, and something I know that the event hopefully isn't rigged. At the end, I feel I've got an equal chance of winning it. The thing about live dealers are, if that roulette wheel is spinning right in front of you live, okay, I'm more likely to, and I play roulette, I'd be more likely to do it than a pre-programmed, let's say, playing with what I feel is playing with imaginary dice. So it really is about enhancing trust between the gambler and the gambling operator. I think people want to, some people want that kind of feeling of a live experience sitting in their front room. If you've got a situation where you can still see the sights and the sounds, and I mean that's the thing. I love the actual offline gambling experience. I love walking into a casino and feeling the lights, the noises, the sounds. I'm sorry, that with the best will in the world, you can't recreate that in an online situation. But for me, it isn't about winning money. But I think most online gamblers, they're there if they're playing poker or they're playing on Betfair or whatever. They're wanting to win money. So it's not. I just think playing with live dealers or whatever enhances that experience and makes them think there's less chance of it being rigged.
And just as a quick add-on, you were talking about roulette being a purely chance game. Recently there was a paper published about a pair of mathematicians who claimed to be able to use chaos theory to boost a player's edge to 20%, which for European games is approximately 10 times the house edge. Any credence in?
No idea. I don't know what. I can't comment because I don't know their system. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I mean, obviously people have said that loads of people come up with systems saying that there was one a few years ago where people could basically work out what they claimed they could work out what quadrant a ball would fall in based on how fast the ball was spinning, where the ball was put in, and of course what you do is put all your chips on what the quadrant you think that's going to fall. Now, obviously, at the end of the day, roulette wheel is something that works on physics. So that's not to say somebody couldn't come up with a mathematical formula, but you'd have to know so many in the time that it takes to do that. I'm not saying that technology isn't there to do it, but to me, it sounds incredibly sophisticated, and my guess is the number of people be able to do that would be very small. That's not to say that it's impossible to increase your winnings, but at the end of the day, I'm a psychologist, and most people don't have lots of fancy gizmos to help you do that.
That's the difficulty. They said it's theoretically possible, but you have to cart an array of high-speed cameras into the casino to pull it off.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. Again, if you've got all the bases covered and you know where the ball first went in and whatever, I'm sure you could mathematically work. I don't think you could do it to the number, but I think the idea of working out per quadrant is probably theoretically possible.
We're going to move on to the question of gambling policy in Britain. So, to start with, how would you summarise the British government's policy towards gambling over the past 15 years? You've mentioned the ideological stance that Gordon Brown took on gambling. Do you think this is representative of the way that the British government has treated gambling in recent decades?
Yeah, but the interesting thing, if you look at it over the last 15 years, as opposed to one incoming Prime Minister at one point in time, it's quite clear that there's been a policy of basic liberalisation and deregulation. Mm-hmm. I think what you see around the world is that governments have woken up to the fact that gambling is a fantastic way to raise the state's coffers in a way that people don't see that you're raising taxes. And when you put taxes on gambling, people don't see it as a tax. The irony is, of course, there are some forms of gambling that are claimed to be regressive forms of taxation. So a lottery, for instance, most people, well, for all the research points to the fact that lottery players, it's the lower socioeconomic groups that spend far more of their disposable income playing the lottery, and therefore there's a disproportionate amount of taxation goes back from those that can least afford to do it.
Tax on the poor.
Yeah, it's like, I mean there was a lovely Viz. Viz have their top tips. They had a tip for John Major, who was the Prime Minister at the time. It was something like, why don't you have a tax on the what's it called? Why don't you have a tax on the everyone that's innumerate? Call it the National Lottery. And that's the thing. You see, people just really don't understand. Sorry, I'm straying off off policy here, but I mean, people just basically don't understand what 1 in 14 million actually is. You know, so giving somebody the odds, which you should do in terms of being socially responsible, but you would get better odds of Elvis landing on the moon on the back of the Loch Ness Monster. I mean, 1 in 14 million. I mean, you know, we've done surveys. There's other surveys being done showing that people think if they put the same numbers for the rest of their life on the national lottery, their numbers will come up at some point. I mean, that is a tribute to public innumeracy in terms of not understanding what 1 in 14 million actually means. But anyway, I mean, going back to policy, the basic British policy has been to liberalise and to deregulate, mainly because it's a way of bringing in extra money, and it doesn't affect, you know, the typical, you know, base rate of tax that people are paying. Now, I personally think that, you know, in terms of things like super casinos and more gambling opportunities, you will see more and more happening. I mean, the bottom line now is that there's so many debates, for instance, about whether there should be more bookmakers on the high street. I mean, I do court case after court case in terms of betting shop applications. Now, the thing is that, you know, adding one more betting shop in an area where there's 6 already makes no difference to problem gambling, particularly when basically people have got hundreds of bookmakers on their mobile phone or in their home or workplace. You know, the fact is, an offline high street bookmaker has far more in terms of protective social measures to stop problem gambling than anything online, and that's why I just think the arguments are null and void now about the opening of more and more offline opportunities, because there are just masses online. But really, I mean, the whole policy has been what I call the drip, drip, drip effect. Occasionally you get these little bumps where there's you know, at the moment there is a lot of talk about reducing the number of betting shops in the high street. This looks like it's an anti-gambling policy. Hilary Benn has recently said it's even not about, you know, he just wants to see a reduction because he says the high streets don't look very good for having bookmakers in it. It's not even an argument about causing problems. He's just saying that, you know, high streets shouldn't have bookmakers because they don't look very good on the high street. But the policy is, and will continue to be, liberalisation and deregulation until, of course, something happens where there's a public backlash. You get these cycles of kind of prohibition and deregulation. You see it with alcohol, you see it with drugs, you see it with gambling. You know, it's amazing what happens around the world. Like, for instance, Canada, they pour more money into gambling research, gambling education, gambling prevention than any other country in the world that I can think of. And it all started when basically a senior minister's son in one particular jurisdiction tried to commit suicide because of his gambling problems. Then, of course, that was in Quebec. So Quebec said, right, we're going to put $10 million aside for research into gambling and for treatment and prevention. As soon as Quebec put 10 million, Ontario said, well, we're going to put in 12 million. As soon as Ontario put in 12 million, British Columbia said, well, we're going to put in 14 million. There's so much competitiveness between the states about being seen as being, you know, doing something good. So, you know, people like one of my colleagues, for instance, I published a lot of papers, that he's moved over to Canada because they're awash with money for, you know, research, prevention and education. Yeah, I mean, that's an example of where one event has kind of kick-started a whole sequence of having a country that's very well funded for researching in this area.
What do you believe is the government's primary agenda in regards to gambling legislation? A 2010 Deloitte study revealed that the industry generates £700 million a year in taxes, and presumably that's increased with the proliferation of things like mobile gambling. So, is the government's primary concern when it legislates in ways that restrict the gambling industry to protect players, or are they simply trying to generate taxation?
What I've already said is that most governments are aware that if you basically tax gambling, lots of money comes in.
Yeah.
And that's why most countries... Now, obviously, Britain's no different from that, in the sense that there's you know, people want to gamble. We'll legally provide gambling opportunities to do so, but we'll also take a cut of the profits that you make. Having said that, the Gambling Commission will say that, you know, we're not going to allow this to happen unless we can show that you know, it isn't an avenue for crime, that children and vulnerable people aren't exploited, that harm minimisation and player protection measures are in place. You know, I don't think the government would want to do anything where it negatively impacted on society. All these decisions, they kind of make a cost-benefit analysis of what the positives versus negatives. I personally believe that in most gambling situations, the positives outweigh the negatives. You know, if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have mass gambling everywhere. You know, the bottom line is that most people who gamble do not have problems. most people who drink alcohol do not have problems. That's not to say that those small minority don't occur and that we shouldn't think about protecting those vulnerable and susceptible people.
How do you interpret the debate between pro-gambling lobbies and those people and organisations calling for further impositions and restrictions on the gambling industry? I mean, where do those voices come from and what kind of positions do they tend to take?
Well, the thing is, any consumptive industry, whether it's nicotine, whether it's drinking, whether it's gambling, you'll always get people on, diametrically opposed in terms of whether we should be offering this product or this service to the nation as a whole. Obviously, in terms of the kind of anti-gambling lobby, a lot of it comes from either religious beliefs or beliefs that are founded on, personal experiences of the people that have undergone that. I think we live in a mature society now, and that gambling has always been around. Trying to, for instance, limit it or basically prohibit it means it just gets taken underground. I think we have a very mature attitude that the vast majority of the British public, if you include the lottery, do gamble. Even if they might not think they're gambling, we quite clearly are more of a nation of gamblers and not a nation of gamblers. Obviously, we know that in terms of the gambling lobbying industry, there are lots of connections between government departments. I think what was quite interesting, I've twice been on the all-party gambling scrutiny committee. There are, last time I went up before them, I think there were 21 members, and 18 of those members, in terms of conflict of interest, 18 out of the 21 held directorships of gambling companies, were non-executive directors of gambling companies, lobbied on behalf of the gambling industry. It just seems to me, in terms of potential for corruption to happen, people can look at that and say, the only people sitting on this committee are those who have a vested interest in the continuance of the gambling industry. But having said that, if the public really didn't want lots of gambling opportunities, you would find that at the ballot box, basically. And the bottom line is that most people don't have a really strong opinion on whether gambling should be I think most people wouldn't want gambling to be prohibited. It's just it's a knee-jerk reaction that wouldn't serve anybody. Having said that, we are living in an age where people can gamble more on lots of different things that we never imagined when legislation was first introduced. When the last National Lottery Act came in, I think nobody could foresee mass internet gambling, gambling via mobile phones, gambling on interactive television. So legislation always seems to be 2 steps behind technological innovation, and obviously with technological innovation, that usually is about increasing the participation rates in gambling somehow, and therefore we do have to have what I would describe as responsible gambling measures in place to help minimise the harm.
Now, in your work and in this interview, you've already acknowledged concerns surrounding fixed odds betting terminals, but you say they shouldn't be banned. Can you please explain this position for us?
I don't believe I don't think any form of gambling should be banned unless there is scientific evidence that it affects far more than it. Well, in terms of, again, it's kind of positives and negatives. The point is, fixed odds betting terminals are located within bookmakers' shops or occasionally within some casinos. Okay. These are dedicated gambling environments. You can't walk into a bookmakers and not expect gambling experiences and gambling products to be offered for people to play. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, the debate around fixed odds betting terminals is that people can lose huge amounts of money in a very short amount of time. The bookmaking industry, believe it or not, have listened to these concerns, and I know for a fact because I've just redrafted the Association of British Bookmakers Code of Conduct on Social Responsibility, and anyone who now wants to be a member of the Associated British Bookmakers will now have to put limit-setting features on its fixed odds betting terminals, which will mean that people have to make a pre-commitment in terms of how much they're prepared to lose in terms of money and in terms of time. Now, to me, this seems an ideal situation. The thing about most forms of gambling is that when you're in the midst of gambling, when you're actually there gambling, is that rationality goes out the window. The adrenaline's pumping, you feel completely different than when you make a cold decision and you step back and make a decision. Most people who pre-commit, if they say, I don't want to lose more than £50 a month on a fixed odds betting terminal, is that they'll be able to, in the very near future, is to be able to, on a fixed odds betting terminal, be able to set the limits that they're prepared to lose. Once you reach those limits, you can't play them anymore. Now, it doesn't stop them then going to another shop and gambling there. And of course, in any of this kind of situation, you're only as strong as your weakest link. But to be honest, you can play fixed odds betting terminal type games on the internet all day long. You know, you can self-exclude from one site and just go on to another. You know, people have got to take some responsibility for their own gambling actions. You know, my concerns is that, you know, I wouldn't be advertising fixed odds betting terminals in the middle of Coronation Street. You know, I mean, just, I would just want a sensible advertising and marketing policy around particular forms of gambling. We know that, based on what I said to you earlier, is that the structural characteristics of an FOBT are such that to a vulnerable or susceptible people, that will increase the chances they could develop a problem with that type of game, because it's something you can play over and over and over again. But that's not to ban them. You know, loads of people play slot machines, play fixed odds betting terminals, have no problem whatsoever. You know, banning just isn't the way forward, because what that would do is there would just be an underground market for FOBTs, because people that want to play them will find other places to play them. So it's about the industry taking more responsibility in terms of protecting, knowing that their product. I mean, it's a bit like alcohol. You know, every alcohol bottle has the percentage proof on, and the drink aware campaign. Gambling has to do the same. Is they have to make people aware of all the potential problems so that people can make an informed choice about whether they want to play them in the first place.
Well, that segues quite nicely into the last question.
Okay.
Gambling advertising has come under a lot of scrutiny over the past year. The BBC reported on a Coral advert being inadvertently screened on a children's television channel. You can't even watch a football match these days without being bombarded with gambling ads during the intervals. So, who do you think should take responsibility for this sometimes unethical advertising? Gambling operators or the media? And sort of following on from that, how do you think the government should be looking to regulate gambling advertising?
Okay, I mean, there's a number of issues there. The first thing is we have very strict guidelines that the advertising standard authorities set out. Not only that, is that the Gambling Commission also have their own set of guidelines about what should and shouldn't be in particular adverts. So, for instance, nobody under the age of 25 is supposed to be in an advert. You know, there should be nothing about that gambling will solve life's problems in any way. So, for instance, you know, there was a particularly, what I think, despicable campaign that was run in France. Eric Cantona was the front for the Partouche company, and their strapline is "Bet to Forget." Now, for me, that is just socially irresponsible in terms of what gambling should be about. We had one recently here in this country, the health lottery, and there all the advert, there was a lot of complaints about it, and it said mortgage, what mortgage, with the health lottery advertising. Again, the idea that gambling is going to solve all your financial problems should never be used in adverts. Now, I'm a believer that the gambling, you know, we live in a grown-up, mature society. I personally believe that the gambling industry should have a right to market and advertise their products, but it should be done in a way that kind of looks at the scientific evidence for associations of problems with those particular activities. So, for instance, there is no evidence that the National Lottery causes any problems at all, really. You get the odd person that maybe spends too much in terms of the amount of tickets, but really there shouldn't be. I mean, I'm happy to see the National Lottery advertised in the middle of Coronation Street. It's a discontinuous form of activity that doesn't tend to cause problems. I have more problems, for instance, having scratch cards advertised. Now, the interesting thing was, this is a true story. In 1996, the Home Office produced a document. It was a consultation document, and they defined the idea of this difference between hard and soft gambling. It was particularly related to advertising, because basically they were saying is that the situation we've got now with the lottery is that we'll allow soft forms of gambling to be advertised on television. Now, and the definition of a hard form of gambling, and I mentioned it earlier, was that basically that hard gambling was defined as any activity that involved high or rapid staking. Now, I wrote to the Home Office and I said to them, I've just seen your new definition of what a hard form of gambling is, and by that definition, scratch cards are a hard form of gambling, yet you're advertising it, you know, through every programme on ITV in a typical night. They wrote back to me and said, "Dear Dr Griffiths, thank you for your letter. I can assure you that scratch cards are not a hard form of gambling because they are sold in respectable outlets." So I wrote back and said, does that mean if we put a roulette wheel in Tesco, it suddenly becomes a soft form of gambling? And of course, they didn't bother to answer that particular one. The idea that where you sell something defines what is a hard or soft form of gambling is ludicrous. But in terms of advertising, we've now got a situation, because of the Gambling Act, that's the one major difference people will have realised from the Gambling Act, is that the freedom to advertise loads of different forms of gambling activity is widespread now. If you sit down tonight, if there's not a football match on TV, what you'll get is that before 10 o'clock, loads of adverts for online bingo, then after 10 o'clock, loads of adverts for online casinos and online poker, obviously targeting women before the 10 o'clock watershed kind of thing, and men after the 10:30 watershed. In adult programming, I haven't got a problem. Okay, but my kids, they're typically at least up until 9 o'clock. I don't think they should be bombarded with adverts. So I do think that in terms of advertising and marketing, is that it can be advertised to adults in arenas where adults would normally be doing things. But I personally, my own personal opinion is it shouldn't be in a situation where lots of children or adolescents can watch it.
So we've already ascertained that you feel it's socially irresponsible to advertise gambling at times in which underage viewers might encounter gambling advertising. Do you feel that at the same time gambling brands are socially irresponsible when they advertise on the billboards of major sporting events which are broadcast during the day when children might see them?
Well, the thing is, at the moment, we have a loophole in the law, which means that even during the day, if there's a major sporting event, companies like Bet365, William Hill and Corals can advertise their gambling products before and during a football match. Personally, I don't think that's right. I know I've got 3 children myself. I don't like it that they're bombarded with gambling advertising. The thing is, they've got a father who's a professor of gambling studies, and I can actually explain to them, the ins and outs of gambling. So for instance, we had a situation recently when my son did say to me that he said Van Persie was going to score a hat-trick for Man United in this particular game, and he did. And he said to me, if I'd have put the bet on that, I would have won whatever the amount of money was. And I said, what about all the times you said to me that Rooney was going to score? That and I went through all these things. You're only remembering the one that you would have won. I mean, this is what happens with gambling all the time. So now the thing about things like billboards at sporting matches, I mean, that you're not going to stop that. My guess is that most people really are watching the game rather than watching the electronic adverts that are flashing across the billboards. Same with when you're watching a game. Hopefully most people are watching the game rather than the adverts there. I mean, sport and betting are inextricably linked. You can't stop it. If you look at, for instance, when Manchester United, I think, were sponsored by Vodafone at one point, and they were discussing how Vodafone and online gambling services could be linked to the Manchester United faithful. Those kind of link-ups are going to happen more and more. Obviously, a lot of gambling firms sponsor football clubs. I mean, there is a little bit of concession there, is that football clubs won't sell a children's shirt that's got a gambling sponsor on it. That's not to say the children can't see who's the gambling sponsor. Some of them they may not even realise are a gambling sponsor. So here in Nottingham we have Victor Chandler supporting Nottingham Forest. My guess is most kids don't know that Victor Chandler is a betting outlet. But the thing is, you can't stop this, and there has to be some parental responsibility in educating your children. But I personally, and I've said this for a long time, gambling's an adult activity. If we're going to advertise and market it, it has to be to adults. And for me, I think an easy way to start, won't eliminate it, but after the 9 o'clock watershed would be a good place to start.
And finally, let's talk about, obviously, the hottest topic in terms of representation of gambling, problem gambling and addiction. Problem gambling has obviously received a lot of attention recently, particularly with high-profile footballers documenting their stories of addiction in the popular media. How do you define problem gambling versus, say, gambling addiction or gambling compulsion? Could you possibly elaborate on that for me?
I can. The thing is, every researcher in the area probably has a different personal definition of what, for instance, problem gambling is.
Okay.
When we do research, problem gambling or pathological gambling or addictive gambling is always used what we call an operational definition. So typically, what we have at the moment is there's 2 particular screens that are used in the British Gambling Prevalence Survey. So we use what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. That currently has 9 items, and if you endorse 4 or more of those 9 items, you are classed as a pathological gambler. If you endorse 2 or 3 of those items, you're classed as a problem gambler. And if you don't endorse any items or just 1 item, then you're basically classed as a non-problem gambler. Now, in terms of, do I think that reliably picks up people who genuinely have problems? There's a lot of debate about that. I think personally, if you only score 3 items out of the 9 criteria, I think you can score those three and not necessarily have any major problems in your life. My guess is though, if you're endorsing 5 or 6 of those items, so there'll be items like, has gambling become the single most important thing in your life? Do you do it? Does it compromise your relationship, your work? Often these are about the consequences of that particular gambling behaviour. Now, me personally, because I work in the areas of gambling addiction, video game addiction, internet addiction, sex addiction, workaholism, is I use the same criteria across all my work. Okay, and I basically have 6 criteria. And for me, somebody to be a gambling addict, what I would expect is that gambling is the single most important thing in that person's life, and they would do it to the neglect of almost everything else in their life. They use gambling as a way of consistently and reliably shifting their mood state, either to get buzzed up, high, aroused, or to do the exact opposite, to tranquilise, to escape, to numb, to de-stress, to relax. I would expect the behaviour to build up over time, needing more and more of that activity. It's what we call tolerance. Okay, so for gamblers, what you tend to find is that over time they gamble with bigger and bigger amounts of money for longer and longer periods. I would expect that they have withdrawal symptoms if they're unable to gamble. And I do mean genuine withdrawal symptoms. So on a psychological level, I'd expect people to be moody and irritable if they're unable to gamble. On a physiological level, I'd expect them to have, nausea, hand sweats, stomach cramps, anxiety attacks, all the kinds of things you'd find with other more traditional withdrawal symptoms. The most important thing is something that I call conflict. And what I mean by here is that this activity is so conflicting in this person's life, it compromises their relationships, their jobs, their hobbies. They basically do this activity to the neglect of everything else. Okay, and even to the point of they experience what I call intrapsychic conflict within themselves. They know that they're doing this activity too much, they know they should probably cut down and stop, but they feel unable to do so, and they experience a subjective loss of control. And finally, we've got relapse, is that people have managed to give up gambling for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, even 2 years, is that if they start doing it again, they quickly go back into the cycles they were in before. So for me, there are 6 components there: salience, mood modification, tolerance, withdrawal, conflict, and relapse. If I find a person, I don't care whether the behaviour is gambling, video game playing, sex, work, if those 6 components are there, I would operationally define that person as addicted to that activity. Now, the thing about the British Gambling Prevalence Survey that we do, the number of people that endorse each of those 6, because those 6 items are actually embedded within the questions that we use in the British Gambling Prevalence Survey. Typically, the number of people, so we take the British Gambling Prevalence Survey, we typically survey between 8 and 9,500 people. In that, we typically find that maybe just under 1% have a problem with their gambling. That equates to about 60 people out of the, only 60 people out of all the people we surveyed have got a gambling problem. Okay? Now, out of those 60, the number out of those 60 people that fulfil what I consider to be the 6 basic criteria to class them as an addict, maybe just a handful, maybe 4 or 5. So, the problem is, and it's the way that these things are often reported, the media will say, the British Gambling Prevalence Survey has just come out, it's found that 0.9% of people were classed as a problem gambler using what was then the DSM-4 criteria, and they interpret that as just under 1% have a gambling addiction. So what I was saying before is that all gambling addicts are problem gamblers, but not all problem gamblers are addicts. There's a very different distinction. And also, people talk about compulsive gambling. Well, compulsive gambling technically means is that you engage in gambling, but you don't want to. You have a compulsive need to do it, but you don't actually want to do it. Well, I can tell you now, most addicted gamblers, they do want to gamble. There's no compulsion to it. They really love gambling and they want to gamble. So the thing is, compulsive gambling, addictive gambling, problem gambling, and even so-called pathological gambling, these are all different things. And you can line 50 psychologists up in a room, will all give you a slightly different definition of what it is to be pathological, to be addicted, to be compulsive, or to have a problem. Now, to me, a problem gambler is anybody who says they have a problem with their gambling. If they say, I'm a problem gambler because I spend too much money, that is problem gambling. Now, that's not a very good criterion in terms of how does this affect somebody's life, but that's not to take away that the problem, the person's own perception is they have a problem with it. If they say, well, I've got a problem with this because my work productivity is down because I gamble too much, that could be a problem gambling, but overall it may not affect their life that much here or there. And that's why I think the rates that we have for problem gambling, because in the last survey there were 10 criteria then, they've changed now since the last survey. There were 10 criteria, you have to score 5 or more to be a pathological gambler, 3 or 4 to be a problem gambler. Now, the number of people scoring 5 or more was infinitesimally small. I think we had maybe 4 or 5 individuals that classed as a pathological gambler, and they really would be somebody that equate to a gambling addict. But most people were problem gamblers, only scoring, endorsing 3 or 4 items.
Given these figures, do you feel that the issue of problem gambling is overstated? And also, following on from that, so I understand that the gambling prevalence survey has been cancelled for this year?
Oh, it's not just been cancelled this year, it's cancelled full stop at the moment.
Oh, well, can you explain why?
Well, I think they think that the Gambling Commission run their own omnibus surveys that go on every month, and to be honest, what comes out in those that typically sample 1,000 people, the results aren't that different from what we find in the National Gambling Survey, and I think really it's just about saving money.
Nice.
That's not to say there won't be another one in the future. I mean, they've typically happened once every 4 or 5 years. We had one in '99, one in 2007, one in 2011. So, I hope there's another one in the future. But to be honest, it's the biggest difference we had between the current survey and the previous one is there was a 50% increase in problem gambling. Now, obviously, the report itself, and I was one of the co-authors of that report. We were told very specifically by the Gambling Commission that we weren't to speculate on why that increase might have happened. I personally think the biggest noticeable increase between the 2007 survey and 2011 was the fact that advertising came in 2007, September 2007. And that's the biggest noticeable difference, plus of course more opportunities to gamble online and remotely. So those 2 things I think probably accounted. Now if you're saying, should we be worried? The answer is that just under 1% of British adults still equates to around 500,000 people. And if 500,000 people truly have a gambling problem, that's something that society should be concerned about. Now, we can argue that, to the cows come home whether it's 0.5%, 0.8%, 1.2%. To me, that's irrelevant. The bottom line out, and I get calls every week, emails every week from people where gambling has just destroyed their lives. For them, it's as real as somebody addicted to drugs and alcohol. I work at the coalface. Now, I did something very naughty a number of years ago because the Slot Machine Association told me that there was, and this was a long time ago, this was going back to the mid-90s, they told me that there was no evidence that gambling caused any problems whatsoever and that we didn't need a gambling helpline at all. And so every person that basically contacted me, I gave them Bacta's number. I said, here's the helpline, even though it wasn't, and then they rang me and said, why you keep sending all these problem gamblers to us? I said, you told me there wasn't any. Anyway, but what happened was, shortly after that, we formed GamCare, and now we do have a national telephone helpline. We get over 50,000 calls a year to that. To me, that's not an insignificant problem that we can sweep under the carpet. That's not to say that every one of those 50,000 are addicted to gambling, because my guess is not. But obviously, it's causing problems for people, and it's often we get the wives of husbands or the parents of children, well, adolescents who have problems. So it's something we should be concerned about, but I think the good news is, internationally, we have one of the lowest gambling prevalence rates amongst adults in the world. Unfortunately, we have one of the highest adolescent gambling rates in the world, although, I say the good news, it is coming down.
We've talked a lot about the individual impact of problem gambling, a loosely defined term, and of individual responsibility in regulating one's own gambling practices. But to what extent does society at large bear the brunt of gambling addiction? I mean, presumably it's very different to, say, alcohol addiction, which is associated with high medical costs and a notable strain on the penal system. Is gambling addiction more or less carried by individuals rather than by the rest of society?
Well, I would say that often a lot of gambling problems do result in lots of, I can tell you now, gambling is associated with lots of criminal consequences. I certainly know in terms of medical consequences. The thing is, though, you don't report for treatment saying I've got a gambling problem. It might be that I'm severely depressed or I'm highly anxious, and it's gambling that's causing those problems, but that's not what is down on the doctor's sheet of what you're being treated for. Yes, obviously, gambling is unlike, say, other drugs in the sense that people don't overdose on gambling. But having said that, I've written a number. I wrote the British Medical Association's opinion document on problem gambling in this country. I've written articles, editorials for British Medical Journal arguing that gambling is a health issue for those it affects. Now, often it can be because of the consequences of financial ruin in terms of people feeling suicidal, people feeling panic attacks, anxiety attacks, depression. These are all things that are genuine, being caused by gambling problems. I don't see why. People seem to think that the attitude that people I speak to saying, well, they caused it themselves. Well, how is that different from somebody who goes skiing and breaks their leg? The point is you put yourself in a position where something medically has gone wrong because you were in a high risk situation. We still treat smokers for cancer. We still treat alcoholics. You could argue all those are self-inflicted to some extent, but there does seem to be this kind of difference between people's perceptions of gambling compared to other types of potential addictive activity. But I would argue that there are costs to the criminal system, to the health system, but most of them just go unnoticed because they're classed as something else. Now, again, I was just going to say, I've written loads of articles for legal magazines, etc., and I've appeared in court a number of times on the behalf of individuals who have a gambling problem. And one of the things that comes through there is that if you're in court and you say, I did this because I had an alcohol problem, or I did this because I had a gambling problem, saying you've got an alcohol problem gets you a lighter sentence. So again, if people have got codependency, we often find that gamblers sometimes have problems with alcohol and nicotine and other things. If you present it in that criminal situation, that it's something that basically a judge or a jury understands, is that you're given more leniency than if it's to do with gambling. Again, that's the idea that sometimes it's a hidden addiction, is that because it's not, well, it has been medically recognised now, but still in a court situation, it doesn't get the same kind of weight as if you've got another addictive type of problem.
Okay, and just to finish, in your writings you say that operators should pursue cutting-edge protocols to ensure player protection. So, could you briefly outline your vision for a fair, socially responsible and sustainable gambling industry?
Well, I don't know whether my vision is sustainable, but I'm researched this area for so long now, and I started talking about responsible gambling back in the mid-1990s, and people hadn't even heard of this, didn't even know the words responsible gambling or social responsibility within the gambling industry. Now, of course, you can't get an operating license unless you're showing, at least in this country, unless you're showing what you're doing in terms of being socially responsible, in terms of player protection and harm minimisation. So I've spent much of my recent research trying to advocate there are things that operators can do to help players make informed choices. They can help players who get into trouble. You can help players not into trouble, but give them the kind of what I call a kind of seatbelt approach by allowing them to set limits or temporarily exclude themselves from a gambling situation. Basically to empower people, basically to get people to pre-commit about how much they want to gamble in terms of time and money. We've now got the technology, of course, particularly through with online, we've got behavioural tracking data. We can actually do that offline. We've got now a couple of countries, Norway and Sweden, both introduced player cards, which means that any form of gambling activity they do, they have to show their player card, and basically it logs everything that you do. Through behavioural tracking, I know it's kind of big brotherish, but it's there, once gamblers realise it's there to actually protect them and to hopefully intervene when people are getting into trouble. Now, in this country, we just don't, the idea of an ID card is not something that's very popular. My guess is if we try to introduce a player card here straight away, that just wouldn't happen. We have to do things in stages. I think what's happening now is that every sector in this country has its own kind of code of conduct in terms of what they should do in terms of either in terms of game design. So for instance, one of the products that I developed is that we have over 30 companies worldwide using a tool called GamGuard. And this basically assesses the riskiness of a game based on the structural characteristics that have been designed into that game. So companies have basically a traffic light system of either red, yellow or green about whether their product that they're going to put out in the market is likely to be problematic to a risky or a vulnerable or susceptible individual. And companies can then make a decision about whether they want to change the characteristics to, if you like, to make it safer, whether they want to still introduce it but decide they're not going to market it heavily, or they're only going to put it in within a dedicated gambling environment or whatever. And so, companies in terms of game design can be socially responsible. They can be socially responsible in terms of how they protect their customers. So if a customer comes to them and says, I think I'm developing a problem, what I do, they should have referral through to known gambling treatment or counselling services. If a gambler comes to them and says, I want to not gamble for this next month, can you exclude me? they should, either temporary or permanent exclusions should be given to the gamblers without any fuss at all. If people want to set limits, it's harder to do it offline, but you could do it certainly with player cards. But online, for instance, now we've got loads of companies using limit setting in terms of initial deposit amounts, in terms of how much money they want to lose, either per day, per month, over a year. We've got time limit, and the great thing is we've just done some research. We've got a player database of over 1 million online gamblers, and we found that these limit setting features do work with the people that most need them, i.e. the most gaming intense people. So really, a lot of it's kind of common sense, but obviously what you don't want to do is be so heavy-handed that it stops people who have no problems whatsoever engaging in the activity, and that's the balance you have to kind of weigh up. But to be honest now, I think jurisdictions all around the world, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, here in Britain, other European countries, to get an operating licence, people will just have to do this as the norm. And if people want to gamble, they're going to have to expect that, just the way we get into a car and there are seatbelts, airbags or whatever, all these tools, they are there, hopefully that you never use, but should that situation arise, that you reach a crisis point, they all come into fruition. And that's, the analogy that I'd have, is that, when we were told in 1974 by Jimmy Savile to click every trip, it's taken 20 years. I can't think, apart from ironically taxi drivers, people that just don't put their seatbelts on as soon as they get in the car. It's become second nature. And I think responsible gambling features and measures and protocols, the more you introduce and the more you just make it part of the experience, people will just come to accept it. So it's going to take time. It won't happen overnight. But I do, things are starting to happen already and people probably don't even know it. But for me, we're not there yet, but I think we've come a great way. It's been radically shifted last 10 years to come from a situation where no company was really talking about responsible gambling to every major company now having a code of conduct and a whole set of things they have to do. So the lottery sector, they now have a whole accreditation program now around levels of social responsibility. It's on 4 levels, and of course all the major companies are trying to get to level 4. So I think we've got 10 companies now in the world who have reached level 4 in terms of protecting its customers, and I would hope that would be shifted across to other sectors.
Thank you very much, Dr Griffiths.
Pleasure.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.